Hello survivors and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 97 of the show, and in this edition we're unravelling mysteries and celebrating histories as we look back on 10 years of Resident Evil Revelations 2. My name is Sai, and joining me on the panel this week, some say he's got the mind of a megalomaniacal madman trapped inside the body of a megalomaniacal madman. It's Fire Button Steve Valance.
Sai, the sluice.
He's a podcast panelist and more reliable than any person. It's James, aka Moist Owlet.
I don't even have a line.
And recording his part of the podcast 6 months after everyone else, it's Kelsey, aka KDB.
If I had a nickel for every time Claire Redfield woke up as a prisoner on an island, I'd have 2 nickels, but it's odd that it happened twice.
Every episode of First Aid Spray is recorded live on Discord, so join our server now to become part of our fantastic community that includes Resident Evil diehards and newbies. If you'd like, you can support the show via our merchandise store or over at patreon.com/FA-SprayPod for as little as $1 a month. All of this and all of our social media links can be found at our website, faspraypod.com. Shout out, first of all, to our latest patron supporter, Tobias Reaper47. Thank you for supporting First Aid Spray, and thank you to all of our patrons for continuing to support First Aid Spray. We haven't had any patron exclusives recently, but we have been doing some work elsewhere over on the First Aid Plays channel, our second channel, where we do gameplay stuff. It's been dormant for a little while, but Steve and James stoked the fire recently by playing all the way through From Software's Kuon, which is a PS2 fixed camera survival horror game. It's really worth checking out. They played the whole game, and as of the time of this podcast dropping, it's either all out or the next episode is about to drop, so you better go subscribe to make sure you get it. And random one-offs like the time that I played a first-person RE2 fan game. Not the remake, the original in first person. That is on there as well. Also, it's worth shouting out, we did a bit of a crossover with What Culture Gaming recently for the second time. Steve joined myself and my colleague Dan talking about Resident Evil remakes that might possibly happen, if we'd like them to happen, and just the general chat about the future of the series. That came out this Monday, so if you'd like to listen to an hour of us talking about the future of Resident Evil, go check that out over on the What Culture Gaming podcast feed. That's everything in terms of housekeeping. Steve, take us into the news if you can. If you please.
Well, since I have your permission, boss.
Scent is important.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
The first news story today. Capcom has another marquee year with multiple sales updates for Resident Evil.
I think this is our only news item today, but this is one of those things, again, every other episode we talk about sales numbers, and it's one of those things where I don't ever want us to feel like we are sort of kissing the Capcom boot or anything like that, but it is worth talking about because obviously it impacts the series in a number of ways. First of all, it's kind of incredible that Capcom, if you're keeping up with the games industry, they're like one of the very few companies right now that are not performing at not a loss, so to speak, but they're not losing money every year. In fact, they're doing better year on year. And that it was part of this news. Resident Evil has now surpassed 170 million units lifetime sales, and Monster Hunter on 120, which in itself is, I know we're a Resident Evil podcast, but from the Monster Hunter perspective, that's very impressive how quickly that has rocketed up to pretty close to Resident Evil's level, considering how big Resident Evil has been over a sustained period of time, whereas Monster Hunter, I mean, it's been around a while, but it hasn't been big for as long as Resident Evil has. So all around, pretty impressive stuff. I've just had another look at the Platinum titles. I mean, I think we talked about this before, but in the top 11 Capcom titles, that's all of the RE engine Resident Evil games. You know, I'm talking about 7, Village, 2, 3, and 4. They're all in the top 11. So things are good over at Capcom. There's a slight addendum that I wanted to add to this, just to bring to the conversation. And you see a lot of these articles doing around, and it's speculation and theories kind of presented perhaps as fact. But I think this one had some validity to it. From comicbook.com, put a headline out saying Capcom update is bad news for Resident Evil 9 release date. And they point to the fact that Capcom, as part of this information about their fiscal ongoings, said that until March 2026, when everything resets, they're looking for kind of a lower sort of return this year. They're looking for a fairly low number compared to most other years. Now, that kind of spells out the fact that we're not going to be getting a big Resident Evil release in this time because, as I've just said, all of those big titles from the RE engine have gone on to do really well and have started very strong. And obviously, we've been waiting for a new Resident Evil game for several years now. So if they were anticipating a Resident Evil game before March next year, surely they would be anticipating a larger number, a larger metric. So I think that's really good journalism from comicbook.com to actually go, oh, hang on a minute here. So, yeah, I'm just going to pass it to the panel. What did everyone think about what's going on over on Capcom? And whether you think we might see a Resident Evil game before March, or do you think that that is indeed good indication that that won't be the case? James, how are we feeling?
I think we will get a teaser or a trailer for Resident Evil in the next 12 months. Actually, we're probably talking 6 to 8 months, to be honest. But yeah, normally Resi's, they actually any Capcom game normally releases in the first quarter or the second quarter, right?
It kind of fluctuates.
Yeah, like they're very rarely released later on in the year. So that's like, that was going to be my other point, is like maybe they're thinking about just saying, oh, it's happening, and then, you know, say that it's coming out like summertime next year, but then actually intend to push it back to the later half of the year. But that's unlike Capcom to do that. It's cool. Like you say, it's cool journalism that they've done. It kind of makes me a bit sad because it's like, oh, we can kind of read the system now. You know, you can read the Matrix because of bit like what the income is projected to be. But at the same time, it's been so long. But
does feel like it's going to go on. Sorry,
but we are so spoiled, though. We have been
spoiled for so long. So we're overdue this kind of period of quiet. And I do think that it's going to go on for a while. Talked about the What Culture Gaming podcast, so I mentioned it on there as well. With the new Onimusha reboot coming May next year, it feels unlikely that they'd release a Resident Evil game in the early part of next year as well, for risk of cannibalizing sales. And also just, you know, is it necessary? It seems like in the past, Resident Evil trailers to release is about sort of 6 at best to 9 months, most likely. Obviously, lots of speculation that we might see a trailer for a new game this summer, and perhaps it comes next summer, or indeed perhaps the March next year, obviously being the 30th anniversary of the series. Maybe that's when we get the grand unveiling of Resident Evil 9 and the game comes late next year, which I know is wounding news to hear for those people who are really waiting for that new game. And trust me, as a podcast that talks about Resident Evil, we're kind of dying for some actual news to talk about. Kelsey, how are you feeling about Capcom right now, and when do you think Resident Evil is getting its new game?
Yeah, I think it will be a while. I have a feeling that it's always felt like Remake 2, 3, Village, and 4 were sort of all made in this weird magic bubble, where maybe they were sort of greenlit really close together. And I'm sure back in the day we read that like Village and 4 or 3 and Village were produced alongside each other because they got the same voice actors in and stuff like that. So it's like they had this big pipeline of those 4 games, and that's why we ended up getting so spoiled. And they thought, right, okay, let's see. And then they let it kind of simmer a bit after that, and are taking their time with the big Resident Evil 9, whatever it ends up being. And I presume it will be fairly big. I mean, you know, they like Village and 4 Remake were both quite big. They still weren't big open world RPG games, and we've had people throw those terms around a little bit. I don't think we're going to get that, but I'm sure it will be a big game, and they're taking their time, and they're probably responding to some feedback of the remakes and Village and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not surprised at all that it's not coming this year. I think, as James said, it will definitely get well, maybe I think probably will get revealed or at least confirmed in some sense before March next year. PlayStation always tend to have the marketing, maybe at their next big showcase or something. But I'm kind of happy to wait for a little while. Sometimes it's nice to miss a franchise for a bit. So yeah, I'm not too worried. We have been spoiled, as we've said.
Yeah, there was a I don't know if it was an official line from Capcom, but it was certainly talked about they wanted a Resident Evil basically every year for a little while, and they did manage that for the most part. Something Resident Evil with 7 Village, 2, 3, and 4 come in with nary a gap between them. And RE-verse. But
Stop the
that's what I was
clock.
going to say. You know, in the gap, you had the Shadows of Rose DLC and Reverse, obviously, at the same time.
Lest we forget Infinite Darkness.
And Infinite Darkness happened, and obviously 2023, I don't think we realised it at the time, but you look back on it now, not only did we get Resident Evil 4, but we also got Separate Ways as part of the same year, because Resident Evil 4 came out in the early part of the year and Separate Ways came out in September. We also got Death Island in the summer. So there was a lot going on in terms of Resident Evil that year, and obviously it's since been quiet. I do wonder if, Kelsey, you're right, maybe we are due the quiet period, but I wonder if even Capcom are taking a break so that they can greenlight and start a bunch of projects, and we can just kind of do this cycle again. Because it was such a huge success before. Maybe they'll have a bunch of stuff, so we'll have another sort of series of years where we're really busy. Yeah, maybe there's all these different rumours, and we haven't talked about in the podcast, and we try not to in general. But obviously, lots of people talking about lots of different things. Maybe there is truth to a lot of it. Maybe a lot of different things are happening, and maybe Capcom have decided, hey, we take a few years off, and then we just have a few years where we go crazy. That worked last time. Steve, how are you feeling about the Capcom situation and where we're at with Resident Evil and Resident Evil 9's announcement?
Still thinking, okay, the delay is horrid, but I feel like we're in a strong place. Because, besides Remake 3 being a bit divisive for people, it's been mostly a straight flush, right, of everything being pretty good. Bang, 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 bang. Yeah, okay, the movies weren't going to set the world on fire, but in terms of Capcom's alone output, yeah? I'm actually going to book the trend and say that Summer Game Fest is coming up, and they normally announce, something at an E3. Will it be RE9 or anything else? I don't know, but I feel good and confident that we're going to see something in the coming months at Summer Game Fest. Regards to their other projects and things, the only other big thing is Onimusha now, right? The remaster
and Monster
of the
Hunter
podcast
support,
is out this week.
Yes.
I feel like they're quiet for a reason. I think it was October who pointed out on Blue Sky that the interval is longer than most other Resident Evil mainline entries have ever had, and kind of hinting that they think it's due too, and I happen to agree.
That might
if
be
you don't
worse
get anything,
things.
it's just time to smash the backlogs, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go through GOG or whatever, and buckle down and hope.
That might be why it
this long.
stings, because it's been that longer gap than we've ever been used to,
Would that be their get out? There has been a Resident Evil every year. Look. And then joke, that's a cop-out, Capcom. Come on. No, genuinely, I'm optimistic because the franchise doesn't sell this well and then get shelved forever. And it's been shelved for a bit in Resident Evil terms.
Yeah, I think shelved is. If anyone genuinely thinks that the series is being sidelined, that's quite a silly thing to say because it is a massive success. And just every now and then, you just need to take a breathing room and just read the room, see what's going on, what's the direction here, instead of just constantly ploughing forward and hoping for the best every single time. Because, they've had a lot of successes in that time. It would be a shame for them to ruin it by just continuing to plough ahead. So I'm, in theory, in favour of the break, really. I am getting to that point now, absolutely, where I'm a little bit antsy to see what's next, and hopefully we find out what's next at some point sooner rather than later. Hey, who knows? Maybe that trailer that you're going to get at Summer Games Fest, Steve, is the classic collection. Who knows, right? We can hope.
Umbrella Corps 2, let's get the opposite of hype.
So, with that out of the way then, let's move on to the subject of this episode of the podcast, which is Resident Evil Revelations 2. And now, reading the files, Thoughts on Kafka and Parting Words to My Dear Father from Resident Evil Revelations 2, in character as Alex Wesker, Jen Von Lee, who you can find on social media at Jen Von Lee.
I have a love-hate relationship with this story. Perhaps I can relate to it more closely than I'd like to admit. One morning, Gregor awakens to find himself transformed into a hideous insect-like creature. His family is bewildered at first, but they do try to take care of him. Eventually, he becomes too much of a burden to them, nothing more than an ugly monster, a nuisance to the family. When Gregor learns of this, he retreats to a solitary death. Up until his transformation, Gregor had been supporting the family. Now that he was no longer useful, he was a burden to them. They were relieved when he died. I, too, have been bred to serve a purpose. Once that purpose accomplished, I too would have been cast aside. But I refused to shrivel up and die in solitude. I refused to let myself become a hideous monster. You must have felt the same way too, Albert.
I might have talked about this before, but sort of sketching up First Aid Spray back in the earlier years of the podcast, it was obviously a concerted effort that we didn't talk about everything cool at the beginning. Otherwise, we just wind up with a bunch of sort of lame and bad stuff at the end. And I realise we have kind of had a bit of a season so far, Gun Survivor 2 and so on. But a shining light now appears in all of that as we talk about Resident Evil Revelations 2. Again, we've not talked about in the 6.5 years of First Aid Spray all that much, and I've kind of deliberately kept it in the back pocket so that we've got something nice to talk about. So I guess I'm putting a little bit of cart before the horse there in terms of how I feel about this game. But let's talk about Revelations 2. Some interesting tidbits from development. The Revelations games were made to bring a focus back to horror when the main series was expected to stay more action-heavy, which obviously wasn't the case after Revelations 2 came out because of the backlash to Resident Evil 6. The shift came with Resident Evil 7, but obviously the development of Revelations 2 was already well underway, so that was part of the development. This was designed as something for the classic fans to bring that feeling back to them, while Resident Evil tried to find new fans and try to figure out a new identity and, whether or not you think that's a good thing. Something Resident Evil 6. Revelations 2 was written by Dai Soto, who wrote Revelations 1, which allowed the game to connect with the first in sort of small and meaningful ways, but also was intended entirely to be a standalone title. And the game was developed largely by a different team to Revelations 1, where Soto used the Divine Comedy to inspire Revelations 1. Revelations 2 drew from the works of Franz Kafka, quite heavily, in fact. It's a very clear thing as one of the game's sort of themes. Producer Michiru Okabe, a big fan of the series, selected Barry and Claire himself as the playable characters because he knew they were fan favourites, and included Moira Burton as a nod to her being previously mentioned in Remake 1. The game's episodic nature was inspired, I'm sure you won't be surprised by this, by Telltale's award-winning The Walking Dead series. The first episode, then, of Revelations 2 released on February 24th, 2015 in the US on PS3 and PS4, then the following day worldwide alongside Xbox and Windows versions, and this trend would continue every week for 4 weeks, with episode 4 being available everywhere on March 18th, 2015, alongside a retail release which had all the episodes plus some bonuses as well. The game came to PlayStation Vita that August or September, depending on where you are in the world, and then the Nintendo Switch in November 2017. Metacritic scores for each episode sit around the mid-70s, and the overall game itself has a 75. As far as we can tell, Revelations 2 sold pretty well, possibly helped by its episodic nature, but the first of those is free. I think that's how that works. So I don't know how that impacts in terms of Capcom sort of Platinum. But when you look at the Platinum, it is sitting at number 30, which I think is probably just the retail, everything included game, because I don't know how you'd measure the metrics of all the episode. But that's at 3.7 million units, which is the same as RE6 and nearly 1 million more than Revelations 1. So let's talk about Revelations 2 and our first experiences way back when it released in 2015, which, yes, means it celebrated 10 years ago as of a couple of months ago. Steve, do you remember playing Revelations 2 for the first time? Where were you at with Resident Evil at the time that it dropped? Because, yeah, as I said, it was a strange time to be a fan.
I was excited at the time, because well, something new, something spooky, and Barry's in it. And I was like, ooh, Barry's going to be in it. But I also had to contend with the fact that in the month running up to release, I was holding off for the physical release. So I was avoiding all articles or podcasts or anything. Except there was one small controversy that just kept cropping up, and that was about microtransactions for raid mode, which is like you can buy extra lives, which, by the way, everybody, is pointless. You don't ever need to do that.
Yes.
But it was literally like that was the talk of the town until the game's released, like the full release. But yeah, on the run up to it, up until like the thing's coming out, I thought, oh yeah, I like The Walking Dead, and I miss Barry. This is all going to work out pretty well. So, despite the killing blow that RE6 dealt to a lot of RE fans, I was strangely optimistic, I suppose, would be where I was at.
Interesting. Kelsey, have you played? Well, did you play Revelations 2 on release? I guess is the question.
No. This playing it for the podcast was my first time playing through. I had dabbled. Did you say it was free? Because I assumed had just played a demo back in the day. Maybe
I think Steve, you might know better.
What
episode 1 is free.
Episode 1 was like, how Xbox Live Arcade games gave out a trial.
I definitely played.
It was like that.
I definitely played it, but not for long. Like when this came out, I was just so. I was quite out of sorts with Resident Evil, and I think it's funny hearing you talk about how they effectively pushed the horror stuff to the side projects, which is quite funny to think about them doing that with development. And I wasn't really massively in love with the franchise at the time, so it kind of went over my head, to be honest. And I think I was resenting the series a little bit after, because I'm not a massive fan of 5, as I've kind of said before. And then obviously I remember there being other spin-offs. So I don't know if I'm getting the dates mixed up, but just thinking of things like I was going to say Welcome to Raccoon City, Operation Raccoon City and stuff. And I would just see the games that weren't mainline Resident Evil games that didn't really interest me. So I was out of love with the series, never really played it at the time, wasn't in the headspace to kind of give it a chance. And then I played Rev 1 in like 2021 and absolutely fell in love with that game. And I think I did do a video for First Aid Spray which covered a lot of Revelations 2. And I remember a couple of years, maybe around the same time, watching pretty much all of the cutscenes and stuff on YouTube. So I'd had a fair bit of exposure to the game before playing it through fully for this podcast. But yeah, this is my first proper playthrough.
Exciting. I don't know how I felt about it as an episodic thing. That wasn't what drew me to the game, even though I was a fan of the Telltale's Walking Dead first season. What kind of drew me to the game was the co-op of it, which is the asymmetrical co-op split screen. At the time, I was living with my ex in our first place. Early-ish into our relationship, so it was kind of like, hey, this is a way that we can actually experience a Resident Evil game together, like a co-op Resident Evil game. Sure, 5 and 6 is one way to do something, but Revelations 2, just out of the gate, Capcom was sure to say, hey, this is closer to what the super fans, or whatever, the hashtag true fans want out of Resident Evil. And the asymmetrical sort of slant to it, where you had one character that's focused on the gunplay and another that's a bit more on support. I think, we've all had friendships or relationships with people who are non-gamers or non-action gamers, if nothing else. So this game kind of allowed that experience. So that's, I guess, what drew me to it, even though I was also, and I've kind of mentioned this in the podcast before, in a strange place with Resident Evil after 6, to the point where I kind of bought 7 on a whim and kind of had stayed fairly disconnected from the hype and all the stuff leading up to it. But I don't know why I stayed away from the hype of Resident Evil 7, because I remember playing Revelations 2 for the first time and being absolutely wowed by this. And when I was doing my video game reviews back on YouTube many, many years ago now, Revelations 2 was one of the first ones I did. It was partly the impetus for it. Like, I'd had some stuff lying around that I'd written for fun that I turned into videos, but I think Revelations 2 might have been the first one that I specifically put together for the Size Reviews It show. So, yeah, my expectations were kind of on the floor. I was wowed, and this felt like the olive branch, which is what it was intended to be. James, have you played? I think you have played Revelations 2 before your playthrough for the podcast. I don't remember. Did you guys go through it for the Let's Play series? I don't remember.
Yeah, Steve, did we play this?
No, we haven't. We went and did this one. Actually, I think this was before we actually started doing Resident Evil stuff proper.
Yeah.
You did a lot of long haul streams.
I remember
yeah.
I remember I streamed this game, years ago. And maybe it was for a podcast, I'm not sure. But I definitely completed the game because it was this game that I've had a very positive experience about it. And I am going to be quite critical of this game today, but it's purely because I think I've gone into quite a lot of depth with another podcast about why I like this game, but I can't remember what the bloody podcast was. Yeah, I liked it so much at that point that I titled it like the start of the modern revival of Resident Evil, where we're currently in, you know? And yeah, I still kind of believe that. Yeah, and then when I went back to it, it was nice. It's like putting on a comfy pair of shoes.
Nice. Well, before we get into how those shoes feel, I guess the sort of question I wanted to ask everyone then was, and it's been alluded to a little bit, but how did we feel if we played it as an episodic experience, which it sounds like none of us did. But, when that was an advertising point of the game, if you like. And how do we feel about its episodic format? Because this is something that's in Revelations 1. Obviously, it's broken up that way. And the reason being that it was released for 3DS. So, hey, you can play it in parts and then you can put it back down once you're ready to, or your commute is over or whatever. It's meant to be a bit more piecemeal. Let's make it like an American drama. And therefore, we do previouslys and next times and all this stuff. But with that sort of existing, it kind of allowed Revelations 2 to take from what Telltale were doing and release it in this episodic format, which is a really interesting concept. I'm not surprised that Resident Evil has never done it again, because I think the format was exciting in gaming for a very brief window and it didn't really go anywhere outside of Telltale. But I don't know, I'm just curious how everyone feels about it as an episodic experience, or do you just not even think about it because now that it's out in the full version, you just play it as 4, I guess technically 8 long missions. Steve, how do you feel about the episodic nature of Revelations 2?
At the time of release, I was obviously against it. I wanted to wait for the full release to play it, right? But I kind of feel this is strange because the cultural zeitgeist has changed a little bit. People now are kind of against Netflix binge watching in a way, right?
Yeah.
For example, Andor and a few of the MCU shows at Disney's purposely delay everything by a week. So you watch an episode like syndicated TV, really. In that regard, it's better than The Walking Dead was because they'd already made the game and then basically divided it up, as opposed to they would make an episode and then make the next episode and then make the next episode. I don't know. I'm kind of divided because I feel like having a game experience that's drawn out that can be talked about has theories and conspiracies. Like, I haven't listened to them because I wanted to play the game as it was, but REP did a week by week breakdown of as it was going on. To have that kind of discussion in a long haul Resident Evil game is something that will never happen again, but I kind of got and I missed it.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
I know what you mean. Certainly, it's kind of sad that we never got to try it again, because I missed the window for it for whatever reason. Of the episodic nature didn't appeal to me at the time, or it might have literally come down to, no, I want the physical version, so I'll wait and buy the physical version. But whilst we are now in a more digital-oriented space in gaming, and that continues to be the case and continues to be more of the case, it's kind of a shame that perhaps we won't ever see this again. Kelsey, how do you feel about the episodic nature of this game?
It is very much kind of the time, like you mentioned. This was a massive trend for about, 6 years or something like that. And it feels like off the back of the explosion of episodic TV, being really good and getting really popular kind of in the mid to late 2000s. And then the success in the early aughts, if you think of things like Game of Thrones and Stranger Things and House of Cards and Netflix, like Steve said, loads of games were jumping on this release bandwagon. It wasn't just Telltale. Weirdly, Alan Wake kind of did it before it was cool, even though Alan Wake didn't actually release episodically, I don't think, but the game is obviously, it's structured like a TV series. And I wonder if that was ever their intention at any point. It might have been, but and there was loads of games that do it. There's the Telltale games, the Batman game did it, Life is Strange, the Back to the Future game did it. I think in 2010 or 2011 as well.
I mean, Kelsey, to be fair, you say the Telltale games, you just named 2 of them.
Oh yeah,
Back to the Future
of course I did. Yeah, when you say Telltale, for some reason, my mind literally just goes to The Walking Dead, and that's it. But yeah,
It's honestly fair.
I mean, it started with Sam and Max,
of course.
Service to them.
Then obviously after this, the one starring our favourite Wesker, Mr. Lance Reddick, Quantum Break did it in the biggest way possible by actually making a fucking TV series at the same time. So, the kind of episodic nature, it's the result of, I think, of a trend primarily, and I imagine it was so they could make a little bit more money as well. It's maybe a good way to manage the smaller budget and kind of side project that this was. I definitely don't dislike it. I think it really works given the nature of the game kind of being quite like a TV show, and you're playing a few episodes of a TV show. So yeah, it's, for what it is, it works, and I kind of liked it. So, and one of you said, did it come out week by week, or because I wasn't?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Because I wasn't sure if it was all developed before release and then they held it off, and was it every month and then they could cancel it or something like that. But okay, so that's interesting. They did make it all then. They could have just released it in one go if they wanted.
They did, but I think it was, and they said as much. It was like a social experiment.
Yeah.
I guess it's one of those things where it's priced however you want to do it. If you want to wait and get the full thing, that's your choice, or you can get these individually. I think it kind of worked out kind of the same, basically.
Yeah, okay.
Near enough, anyway. By today's standards, it's kind of, all that you look at. Look at these games, and they seem cheap by today's standards. But yeah,
I have no idea. With games, obviously, you think the development time is so long, but TV shows back in the day, they would be finalizing the cut half an hour before it went to broadcast sometimes, and I do wonder if Xbox were there, or whoever, saying, you got the game package ready yet? Yeah, we're just rendering this last bit of hair on Claire's head, just stand by. Or we had to change this because everybody hated episode 1 or something, but you never know.
James, any thoughts on the episodic format of Revelations 2? Maybe would you like to see it return at all, or is this too much of a thing of the past?
No, I hate it. I hate this trend. I really dislike this trend because that's all it was.
It was a trend.
Yeah, Telltale games were to blame for it.
Yeah.
And it's really ironic as well because it was a TV staple. And as Kel said, back in the 90s and early noughts. But during this time, and some years before it, TV was losing steam. So it just made no sense. I just didn't get it. I wasn't in the fandom when this game came out, but I can speak from experience of being immediately turned off by a game back then when it released episodically. That is my privilege coming out as a gamer. Definitely. I was spoiled, but I also expected a complete game. I wasn't going to buy something piecemeal. I wasn't going to keep, if I completed it, I wanted to keep going, especially if I really enjoyed it. It's different because it's an interactive experience, rather than, I would have liked to have known what my experience would have been week to week. But as Kale said, if it was week to week, then the full game was there. Why didn't they just release it? I do argue that maybe if it was released fully, it might have done better.
Yeah.
This is the first game after RE6.
I think James is right, to be honest.
That's fair. I see that. This is kind of a punt that maybe didn't necessarily pay off. I think it did pretty well considering the situation, because people were burned by RE6 and Operation Raccoon City as well. That doesn't really help either. So maybe they were in a space where it's like, hey, we're going to do something for the super fans and not just bring back characters, but also do something where it actively engages the fan base and gets them to talk about the game week to week to week and stretches out the conversation that way. But I get your point of view, absolutely.
It also wasn't... I'm sorry, I sound so pretentious here. But it's also not a great story. So,
to spread out.
it's not a It's not a fantastic story. It's not one that you want to go to your friends and go, oh, what's going to happen next? You know, It wasn't your Game of Thrones. It wasn't your Telltale games. It wasn't that. Sure. So, like, the episodic thing didn't really work. And then I'll talk about it later. But even then, they tried to put cliffhangers in, and they didn't work either. So, like, but I'll talk about it later.
Interesting. Okay. Well, before we get into the story and get into the episodes, let's talk about the gameplay. That's the most important thing here. As I said, the other, important thing about Revelations 2, other than being episodic, is the asymmetrical characters, whether it's co-op or played solo. I imagine most people, we certainly all played it solo for the podcast, but given 2 characters to control, and obviously that's a big factor in how that changes gameplay. There is an element of cooperation and various other things in here as well. We have puzzle boxes and status effects, I guess, which are quite, I think we're new. We haven't really seen that kind of thing generally. There are the odd, additions here and stuff obviously carried over from Revelations 1. But let's talk about the gameplay in general. James, how do you feel about the way the Revelations 2 feels to play?
Okay. I will talk about Claire and Barry first. So,
okay,
it's ironic because I think you very cleverly like space these 2 apart, and I like that because I got to talk about both of these 2 in pairs, and that was nice for my brain. So Claire and Barry, it's really ironic that these 2 are arguably the main characters of the game because I barely used them in my runs. When I was playing, really? they were like the reaction to the other 2's catalyst, like I would always be like, and that's not really a dig at them. It's not a negative thing. Like it's just an interesting observation of the gameplay loop. I would have liked a little bit more customization with the weapons of theirs or ways to upgrade, but they were always like you get the attacks in or get the setup in with Moira and Natalia, and Claire and Barry like poop dead. Okay, next one, and then it's melee. That's how I played.
Wow.
And it was very interesting and very cool to do that. What are you going to say, Kels?
I'm just saying, wow, just listening to it, it's just like the complete opposite of what I did. And I thought...
Is it really?
Yeah.
That's actually great.
Yeah, no, it is.
Great,
that's
actually.
why I'm like amazed. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
So by the time I got to the end of the game, by the way, yes, as Steve would be very proud of me, I had way too much inventory. Like,
I am proud of you.
I had so many things. Like, and it was great. Like I got very, I talk about like kind of the weapon systems and them not being fully upgradable or customizable to what I wanted. But I was also very spoiled by this game's raid mode as well, like which I'll talk about later on, and like the more recent titles. It had the gameplay with Gary with Claire and Barry. Gary and Claire. It had a really big. The one thing I really liked, and this is strange, but the one thing I really liked is I had a big return to the handgun being a staple for both characters. Like rifle ammo was like rarer than a good RE movie, and shotguns kind of just felt like wet slaps. So, like I always used a handgun, so I always had shotgun ammo and rifle at the end of the game, but I was so terrified of using it because I'd only have 8 rifle rounds or like 10 shotgun rounds, and I only ever used them to keep things from me it was cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, I never felt like a power spike with the gameplay, which kind of sucked a bit, but like it was only when you employed either Natalia or Moira, like I said earlier on, did I feel strong. Like you get those attacks in, and then you take advantage of them with the guns or with the melees or the follow-ups, which I think was the desired effect. That's what Capcom wanted you to do with Claire and Barry. They were like the execution.
That's really interesting to listen to, because I land somewhere in the middle between the both of you, I think. I wound up playing a lot as Moira and Natalia when exploring, because of obviously their ability, and we'll talk about them a little bit more, but their ability to spot items and stuff, and then wound up swapping back to Claire and Gary. And I mean, the other thing that you said, James, about the handgun, you're absolutely right. The only unfortunate thing is that my first note on this really is a negative to start off, is that the gun feedback in this game is bad.
It's bad, yeah.
And I don't think it's the worst thing in the game, but it is like the most consistent drawback in the gameplay, because you are so reliant on the handgun, and the handgun in particular sucks. Like to use, there's just no oomph to it. I don't know what it is. No kickback. It just doesn't. And again, we talked about being spoiled in the news. I think it's one of those things a little bit, perhaps, where we go back from the games that we've had now to this. But even then, I don't know. I just feel like, like RE4 and 5 felt more satisfying gunplay-wise than this. Now, obviously, that is not necessarily... I don't think the gunplay is meant to be the strength of this game, like it is 4 and 5. But it's just unfortunate that I just felt like the handguns felt like pea shooters to fire, unfortunately.
They did. Yeah, and you're completely right. I'll talk about that more later on in sound and stuff as well, because even the sounds in this game are kind of poo-poo. But yeah, to finish off though with Moira and Natalia, for me, the true main characters of the game in a gameplay sense, they can't die, which kind of confused me because I got it with Natalia, but in a mechanical and narrative sense, I didn't really get why Moira couldn't. However, I really enjoyed Moira's gameplay more than Natalia's. Because you have these two forms of like limitless control of the enemies around you. You know, I just flailed, really. Like that's all I did, and then I just waited for a prompt, really fun to use. Natalia's gimmick was way less fun because the bricks were a finite source for fighting these guys, or the BOWs. I only ever used her bricks to like pop revenant blisters to save ammo. And like explore or just run by things, because the AI is so weird in this game that you don't really need to worry about your other partner. And then I don't know if this is a gameplay thing or someone can recognize why this is, but I think the reason why Natalia felt so weak is because the bricks just randomly crumbled.
Yeah, it seems a bit random, doesn't it?
And it's so weird because Moira's...
They have durability.
Yeah.
Moira's crowbar doesn't... Moira's crowbar is before the iron shortage, for some reason. Right? Yeah, these bricks, they break, they're made of talcum powder or something. And it just made her gameplay a lot less. And I would have used her a lot more if bricks just lasted more. Also transitioning and disappearing between areas, very annoying. It means you couldn't foresight or plan ahead. It was frustrating, and seemed like quite a bad foresight from Capcom, considering the power you had with Moira. And yeah, in the end, I would catch myself groaning every time I go into a Barry and Natalia mission. But I always got excited when I went into a Claire and Moira one, for instance.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. What you're saying, where you're coming from. I guess Natalia should be not just narratively more useless than Moira and less powerful, but also the balance. Barry, I like this game has different sets of weapons, different weapon loadouts for each character, slightly different. That's Barry comes in with the Magnum and the assault rifle and the handgun. That in itself is great. It's probably the only time a Resident Evil protagonist has come in adequately prepared. I've got 3 guns. So I guess maybe that's the logic. You could also argue that then, you don't need Natalia as much in combat, like perhaps you do with Claire and Moira, but that's just me musing now. Kelsey, how do you feel about the gameplay of Revelations 2? Yeah, let's do it that way, starting with Claire and Barry and then into the other 2.
Sure. Yeah, it is so funny to hear James say that, because honestly, the only time I used the other characters was when I had to. Or sort of testing them out at the start, because Claire, I was going to say Gary as well then. Claire and Barry. It's stuck now, isn't it? Claire and Barry. Yeah. I thought were both really fun to play as. Now, I've got a few things to say, and you've both sort of said some stuff that I wanted to highlight. And I want to caveat it all with, I do think this game is really good. I think it's kind of the lower budget and sort of the corner cutting is very obvious if you look for it. But I think if you meet it where it is, the game is really fun to play. So you're completely right about the sort of the feedback on the weapons. It feels closer to something that maybe you might play on the DS or a mobile game or something like that.
Sure.
But that's not a bad thing. I just think it's, you just kind of maybe accept what you're dealing with and then it's fine. And I personally, playing this game, I had loads of fun. I thought, full disclosure as well, I did play it on casual because I was worried I wasn't going to get time to finish it. And I thought, right, I can't be messing about. So I'm just going to play it on casual and breeze through it. I still struggled from time to time and I did die a few times as well. I thought that you say the gunplay, the handgun doesn't have much feedback. Like it's still really smooth. The gunplay, both Claire and Barry switching between your weapons, aiming down the sights and shooting. It's really good. It's fun to play with, and simplified mechanics and controls like the healing that we have as well. It is a bit like a mobile game, as I say, but just sort of ramped up and a bit sort of more polished, and just generally running around room to room and fighting enemies. It's easy. It's straightforward. It doesn't ask too much of you. And you mentioned like the status effects and stuff like that. There's a few bits of that which is fine, but I think you've got the things in your inventory that you can quickly switch to and heal yourself and do whatever, and it's fine. And I had lots of fun playing as them. But the stuff that really did stick out to me is how this game does obviously what it intended to, and that's kind of inject loads of classic RE elements to it. And you touched on them a little bit, Si, with the puzzles and the crate pushing, the valves. Some highlights. What did I put on my notes here? So like the booby trap rooms, the laser room, the spiked ceiling trap, all these puzzle inclusions that as I'm playing it, it's just like, oh, this is cool, old school RE vibes all over it. In the same way that Revelations 1 did a little bit, this just does it a lot more. So I did really enjoy that playing through it. I loved the sort of stealth approach with Barry. So I think it's episode 3 where you're going through the town and you're really encouraged to be quite stealthy. That's really cool. The crane and the mini puzzles, was it the crane or am I thinking of the gas thing? The gas puzzle I thought slowed things down a little bit for me and I didn't like that as much. But there was it felt like the game was always trying to do things that didn't focus on the action, and you could slow down and have a go at some puzzles, even if some of them were a little bit annoying sometimes. But yeah, and the character switching to sort of jump to the other two, it is a really cool mechanic. And the stuff you said in your intro, Si, about playing it with someone else, that makes perfect sense. And I'm sure if I had someone else to play this game with, I would have loved it even more. But for me, it just felt like I was being forced to jump around sometimes, which it just adds button presses, which if you're playing as a solo character, it just gets a little bit annoying. And the stuff that you can do with Moira and Natalia is good. I thought like the torch reveal for the items is a nice little touch. James, you mentioned that just the pointing is I mean, is a bit silly. It's just she could have a torch as well, maybe, but instead she just points at the items instead. So okay, fine. One thing that did really annoy me is there is different buttons for picking up files and items. I don't know if anybody noticed that.
For me it was E and F.
Yeah, so why it's not just an action button, like the same to read a file and pick up an item, I have no idea. So they had different buttons for that, so that was really annoying. I suppose overall general gameplay, it did feel a bit cheap going through the same locations sometimes, but I get, the whole point of it and what this game's doing, and you're playing through the story. So when I first played episode 1 and I was playing Claire's section, it's like, okay, this is all great. And then you take control of Barry, and then I was like, oh, I've been here already, and I'm just walking through the same rooms. I did feel a little bit cheated, but like I said at the start of this gameplay section, if you do just kind of meet this game where it is, I think you can have a lot of fun with it. And once I accepted that, I had lots of fun shooting things, walking around, doing the puzzles, despite a few little bit frustrations with the jumping to the co-op characters. it's hard to be too critical because this isn't a big budget mainline Resident Evil game for what is effectively a side project, a sub project. Like I mentioned, it could be at home on the Nintendo DS, like Resident Evil Revelations was. I think it's really fun, the gameplay. So, a few little whinges, but generally really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed playing as Claire and Barry, and then as Moira and Natalia when I had to a couple of times. But I hardly played as them at all.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's one of those things, actually, because I tried to look up some stuff that I knew or thought I knew about this game, and I can no longer find the source for this information, which unfortunately, so please don't come for me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure I read somewhere that Natalia's point, at one point she was going to have like a laser beam weapon shoot out of her finger, where they were like, that's a bit too crazy. So it's just kind of funny that she just has a, item telepathy as her power now, which is bizarre, but there you go, that's what it is.
So they gave her sad bricks.
They gave her sad bricks, styrofoam bricks. And the other one was, and I cannot find this for the life of me, which is really annoying, is that this game was originally being developed as something else. Whether within Capcom or maybe even outside of, I'm not necessarily sure, but it was just like they had some of the elements here, and it kind of became a Resident Evil game, which isn't uncommon in development. And I found the Resi Facts tweet that I made that mentioned it, but annoyingly I didn't source where I got that information from. Damn me of the past. That it was codenamed Dunes or Descendants. So if anyone can find that information, you do drop it in the First Data Pro Discord server if you can find the source on that, because I would love to read about that again. It's interesting because there's a few things going on here, because this is so evidently influenced by The Last of Us to me, which would have come out 2 years beforehand. It feels a tad behind the curve, if only a little bit. But, it does feel like it's trying to be where gaming was heading, which is why they did the episodic thing and that kind of thing. Putting scraps together to try and make something experimental is absolutely the Capcom and Resident Evil way. And so in that sense, it's kind of interesting to me to see them doing something like this. And it's not really been talking about how weird Revelations 2 is, in the sense that it comes between RE6 and then the big reboot of RE7. It sits in such a strange place because in 4 short years after this, we'd have the reinvention of that third-person over-the-shoulder gameplay again with Remake 2. So this is identifiably like MT Framework era Resident Evil, like 4 and 5, but it also doesn't feel like 5 or even Revelations 1. It's not nearly as... The camera isn't stuck to the character quite as much. It's less claustrophobic. It's a bit looser. So it's definitely got a unique feel to it in that sense, despite being a bit of a Last of Us wannabe and a bit of this and a bit of that and loads of things mashed together. It becomes this weird, interesting, unique soup of stuff that does and doesn't work. I do think that playing it solo and having to swap to Moira and Natalia is kind of frustrating at times. When you're playing it solo, it breaks the flow of the game. If you're playing on higher difficulties in particular, and you kind of need to do that to make sure you've got the supplies. Most of the time, my inventory was just filled with bloody cloths that I didn't need. Why have I got so many bloody cloths? I don't use most of them, but I very rarely get the 2 status effects, which are like bleeding and covered in goop, I guess, or the other one is called. It is kind of handy that you can give your support character those items to use for you when you're under duress, I guess, which is nice. But I just wound up with so many damn cloths. In terms of the Resident Evil throwback stuff, Kelsey, you're absolutely right. You mentioned a bunch of them there, but I think one of the best things about it, a bit low key, well, varies in how low of a key, but the zapping system kind of makes a bit of a return here. It's the only game which gets close to it, where you can go through the campaign and make a difference for what you're going to do later as you walk through the same areas. I think the only one the game really outwardly tells you about, in perhaps like a hint as you're loading a load screen kind of hint, old school that feels now, is that popping the red growths on the enemies. Are they called the afflicted?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. They'll leave like mines on the floor, essentially, where if you walk too close, they kind of like blow up in your face, and you can take them out with the torch or shoot them.
I wondered where,
depending
they were
on where you kill
from.
those enemies.
I didn't even realise that's what was happening.
And there you go. It's depending on where you kill those enemies, those are dropped down,
Right.
and Barry and Talia would come across them later potentially and stuff like that. And that stuff's really interesting. And then the more broad things, obviously we had the very obvious one with the game's ending, but also changing the water directions in the sort of sewer area, as Steve mentioned at the beginning, the sluice and all that kind of thing. There's one where you just, if you open this door later, Natalia can go in there and open a box. And the big one that's not really talked about is the monster fight with Pedro, the guy with the drill. You can run away from him as Claire and Neil and Moira, but if you kill him, Barry doesn't do that boss fight later. He just finds the drill instead. And that's really cool. And the game doesn't really talk about that kind of stuff. And that's one of its low-key kind of banger things for me. Steve, how do you feel about it? You've waited very patiently. How do you feel about the gameplay of Revelations 2, top to bottom?
See, to me, this is a paddling pool that's like, 6 foot deep. It's there's a lot to unpack. There is a lot to unpack. First and foremost, shame on every single one of you not mentioning that this game has the best dodge in the series. Literally press a button to dodge whenever you want. You've got a few iframes. James, you're a Souls player. My God.
I forgot that.
Okay.
Is it a roll? No.
No,
Then
it's just a sideways
then
dodge.
it is
but
not
does the exact
superior.
same utility.
It is.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Needs to have a
It's
roll.
much more spammable and no stamina gauge usage. For shame. Shame on you.
Also, those immunity frames are bullshit.
You can expand it with level ups and the skill tree system that no one mentioned.
That was the other thing. Thank you, Steve. Go on. Please do.
Which you can, you can various buffs and perks you can use to spec out your characters. In my case, much like James, I focus more on Natalia and Barry because Natalia and Moira, because Barry and Claire are very capable. They are basically your classic Resident Evil character with the ability to crouch. That's a great perk. I'm really glad you guys figured that out. Well done. But those two are your opening gambit. I use them as my explorers and recon, and in both cases, I'm a big fan of character action games and stuff like Doom Eternal. So I kind of gave them something more to do, and that they were going to be my sole purpose grenadier. So any explosives, they all had them. That gives them something else to do in combat. I completely ditched the tourniquet and the cleaning wipe things because the utility is so situational. And if you're good at the game, you don't need it ever. Mm-hmm. You don't need it ever. It's a waste of time. No wonder we haven't had status effects since, is all I'm saying. But generally speaking, I would open up with Moira or Natalia as the recon, finding items, seeing enemies, preparing for a stun strike with the flashlight and stunning, and then finish them up with the protagonist of the general capable RE variety where they just blast them. I personally think the guns were fine. I thought the parts were okay. But when it came down to it, the handgun's more of a fallback. I normally open up with the shotgun because it's the first time, probably the last time, we'll have a double barrel horizontal shotgun. So my Doom fan is sated. Enemy variety, I thought, was the problem for me. In Claire's campaign, you've got basically screaming madmen, and that's mostly it, except for a dude with a weird helmet. It kind of falls off. It's a bit better in Barry's campaign, I'll grant you, because you've got two casts of monsters and they intertwine and have a bit of narrative linearity, as well as those incredibly creepy glasp things. We'll talk about them more later. But no, generally speaking, I had no real complaints other than I had to turn on the laser sight.
Interesting. That's fair. The skill tree, I'm glad you mentioned it. I think this is the only game that has a skill tree. Is that right? Like this, anyway. We've got games with the odd, upgrade, but something where you're spending points and unlocking future abilities. I quite liked it, actually. I quite enjoyed it, and it's incentive to play more and go through it again and build those points up and max out your characters. With the asterisks, by the way, if you've not played Revelations 2 and you're going for all the achievements, don't do what I did and give Claire and Barry the ability that makes them more capable when you're not playing as them, because there is an achievement for getting a knife-only episode 1 as Claire, which is nigh on impossible if you're doing that, because if you leave Claire alone for a minute, she just starts firing wildly. And also, it doesn't help that the game has finishing moves and stuff like that, which is cool. Those count as not a knife.
Oh.
Slight bit of frustration. Wow. I played through the campaign. I was like, do you know what? I enjoyed that enough to keep playing. I'm going to get some of the achievements. And I tried that. I played through episode 1 as Claire 3 times, and I can't. I'm giving up on this. The unfortunate balance therein is, I just wanted to throw it in there, the weapon parts thing that comes across from Revelations 1, I feel was kind of just here for the sake of it. Like, I don't feel like there was enough going on to make it worthwhile, not enough parts. I didn't think it made much of a difference. With Revelations 1, I was always having to weigh up what I wanted on the guns, whereas this, the gun slots were enough to basically just use all the parts that I had in whatever configuration I perhaps wanted, but I was very rarely leaving parts behind. Maybe that changes with multiple playthroughs and difficulties, but I just felt like that aspect was very undercooked as opposed to the first Revelations game.
I say it's puzzling because, we'll be talking about raid mode later, and the game has a shed load of parts, like an absolute mountain. Now, I have to agree that it's very underbaked. Like, I would probably put the 2 burst on the shotgun just for that extra big of oomph. But otherwise, most of it's just minor stat changes, like fire rate a bit increased, reload speed's faster, magazine holds another 5 bullets, like big whoop.
Yeah,
it's really bad percentages as well. It's like 5%, 8%. Yeah. It's like, that doesn't feel strong. There's no. That's what I was talking about earlier on with the power spike stuff. There wasn't enough power spiking.
Yes.
Didn't have that fantasy of a power spike much.
Which is weird because it's such a part of Revelations 1, and again, this is a side game where you can do this kind of stuff, and it's meant to be a bit more arcadey. I mean, heck, as Steve said, we've got the raid mode, which is like the most arcade of arcade mini games that the Resident Evil has done. So it is weird to go from the campaign into raid mode and be like, this is where all the parts have been hiding. Okay, cool. Unless anyone else has got anything else on gameplay, move into the story, which will break up into 2 parts rather than 4. We'll talk about episode 1, episode 2 for both characters. Also, another chance to maybe just talk about those episodes in general and how you felt about them in terms of the pace and the locations they're in. Episode 1 and episode 2, which opens with, Claire and Moira and a bunch of TerraSave employees waking up on a prison island. Moira being, of course, Barry Burton's daughter and new at TerraSave. And they go looking for, A, what happened, and B, Neil Fisher, who's like their boss, and come across various monsters and the mysterious Overseer. And then 6 months later, we bounce to Barry coming to the island on a boat by himself, well-equipped, and immediately bumping into a little girl called Natalia, who has the strange ability to sense monsters, and as we go on to find out, is a survivor of the Terra Grigia incident. Was saved by TerraSave, in fact, and has unfortunately been wrapped up in yet another situation. Claire and Moira meet up with co-workers. Gabriel and Pedro are, of course, in the game to suffer, as is the way with Resident Evil and horror.
My life is awesome.
Yes, his life is definitely not Jim. And we kind of go from there, and that's sort of you set up for the first couple of episodes leading up to James, you mentioned cliffhangers, but the cliffhanger at the end of episode 2 that there is another Wesker, and we have the photo of Wesker and a mysterious woman, and I think, for my money, this was done great with Barry being like, "Oh, Wesker, there he is," and then suddenly the penny sort of drops that they're both talking about different Weskers, because the Wesker that Natalia knows is in fact Alex Wesker, the name in the file from the Resident Evil 5 DLC. And we have a strange hunchback figure in the background as well during this kind of strikes. Steve, how do you feel about the story of Revelations 2, the sort of first half of it, the revelation of Alex Wesker, bringing back Claire and Barry, all this good stuff? How did you get on with it?
It's hard to unpack because I overthought this probably a bit too much, because I'm going to immediately open up with, who are the gas mask guys and where do they go? They raid the party and then they just bugger off. But no, it's okay, cool. I'm going to assume that they're basically FBC guys working for Neil to get jobbed off. Don't worry about it. Let's not think about that too much. There was a lot of articulation and planning in this whole experiment that Alex is throwing together in basically a gauntlet of horrors launched their way. I like it how it's introduced, that, very big callback to Code Veronica with Claire in the cell, crawling forwards. Then we see Moira, who's basically prototype Remake 2 Claire, even funnier, which is, because as we'll find out over the course of these 2 episodes, Claire's personality, while mostly similar, has changed a bit. For example, she's a bit rubbishy with kids. I don't know why she is, but she's a bit rubbishy with kids, a bit more preoccupied with Neil. But no, the actual setting and scope of it is pretty fun. I more so the fact that whatever you do with Moira and Claire regarding like the big fire trap, you then have to deal with as Barry later on. I thought that was brilliant. The environments, generally speaking, evoke a different franchise entirely. Like, especially the opening chapter feels like it's from a Silent Hill game. It does not feel like it's from a Resident Evil game. I get it. That's the point what Alex is trying to get across, and it's used in all the marketing. It's very moody, but doesn't really sit well. Then you get the moody abandoned fishing village, and I thought this is a really fun setting for a Resident Evil game. Why have we not been back here since? The Vosik area, I mean. An abandoned town, especially the opening of Chapter 2, is a lot stronger, I feel, than later on in that one building after going through some sewers. Where it's kind of just, oh, great, I'm basically in Dismal Land. Or somewhere in Stalker. That kind of runs together for me. But the opening prison, while feeling like a Silent Hill level, was pretty fun. And the only other note I've got on really the opening landscapes and stuff is the spooky forest.
Yes.
It's not used for long enough. The introduction of the Revenant is great, however. That narratively speaking, though, it kind of all runs together for me. Like, it's because I've been looking at it too long, and like there are things that happen that puzzle me. I do like Gabe for the 2 seconds of screen time he gets, but it's all about Claire and Moira, and Pedro's there too. His life is awesome.
I think the CV stuff is really funny. Not just the prison island thing, but also the fact there's like a slow-mo big glass building erupts in gunfire as well. The intro's so cheesy, and I don't even mean when it's supposed to be cheesy. And it is supposed to be cheesy because the game has a line about being the mop that cleans up bioterror or something, and terror doesn't have to end in wrist, which is just like nonsense. But just like guys shooting glass and not hitting people on the other side was really funny to me. I forgot that was a thing. I think that it's interesting because, yeah, this game feels slightly weirdly informed by... Well, let's start less weirdly informed by something like a Saw.
Yeah.
I get Saw vibes from this. But also, because it's like, you're going to do the trials and the fear and ooh, but also, weirdly, the Silent Hill games of the era, or the slightly previous era, which are not the Silent Hill games that everyone remembers the most fondly. I know it has its fans, but it's weird that you're right, Steve, like earlier chapters of this feel like they could be ripped out of something like a Homecoming or a Downpour or something of it. And it might be because it's a game of it this time and this generation, but it's very strange going back to it now. I think the T Phobos, we talked about it at length when we did Virology. I think fear is the central plot thread, and you've been infected with a virus and you've been given these bracelets to change colour, and if you get fearful, the colour changes, and then eventually you'll be injected by the sort of second part of the virus, or however it works, and you get turned into a monster. That would be really cool if it was part of the gameplay. It's kind of a wasted opportunity, which I guess what I mean is bring Phobos back, maybe, and do something worthy with it. Because after episode 2, it pretty much doesn't become a factor in the story again. It's just there as a setup, and then to mutate Pedro into a monster later. And I don't think it really ever comes back after that point. But I've got a few more notes. But James, how are you feeling about episode 1 and 2 of Revelations 2?
Yeah, they're solid setups for the story of the game. So much is dumped on you at the beginning of these episodes that I remember when I first played this game, I had no idea what all these names were. The Vosik, Alex, Natalia, why Natalia was there, but I guess you're meant to be asking that question. Who the Franz Kafka is, his name is everywhere. He's on every loading screen, yet, I feel, it's, I'll talk about that later. But yeah, Alex being vague and cryptic, really cool. Like, it's a really great vehicle for the virus itself. Like, she reminded me of a DM. She reminded me of me behind a screen. Yeah. I'm in a horror game. Like, I'm trying to instill fear into you, and that's what she was doing. She was trying to, and you could really feel that with the performance she was doing. Yeah, I did notice, and it was a really cool kind of. I mean, maybe it's just my head that thinks this, but yeah, the atmosphere is also slightly different for both of these playthroughs in 1 and 2, and then it switches as you go through the game. Like, Clara Moira's start is a really difficult, like, right at the beginning, really difficult gauntlet with a puzzle that has multiple solutions, but has one result, escaping. And then in contrast, you got Barry and Natalia, very quiet, subdued, like, the island's died. Like, other than a few dregs you find later, which sets up Natalia's reveal that Moira had died. Spoilers. To Wesker's, what? Not Wesker, Gary's, what? Yeah, and it was cool because, like, Alex is stupendously pretentious, and so was the plot. It was meant to be confusing. Kafka's name being mentioned, like, often to attempt an elevation of the plot as well. I liked it in like 50-50. I liked it, but I also felt like it didn't deliver well.
Right.
Like, his name was constantly mentioned, but there was no other mention of him. And I was going to look up his works offline, but I feel like if you're going to mention him, you need to go deeper into him instead of just making 2 notes. You know, secret notes, which honestly didn't really explain an awful lot. Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier on in gameplay, but I really love the continuity things that you have control over, which I really, really enjoyed. Like, solving that first gauntlet a certain way, and it gives Barry's playthrough a golden custom part. That was really cool, because you could, if you don't spin the flamethrower while it's on, it doesn't destroy the spinny thing, and then you can get the golden thing with Barry. It's really cool. Yeah, Pedro and the drill means you could just zoom through a section of the game without even worrying. Like, if you're trying to do speedruns, that you kill Pedro. Really cool. Yeah, and I need more of that in Resident Evil. And I think we you know, I constantly say it, you know, ever since I've been playing these older games, but, you know, the ones older than the later entities and the remakes. I want more of that in Resi, because I just, you know, and they're definitely capable of it, and I want to see that in more later editions and entries. It's a key part of Resi for me now, like experiencing it, to have these in the franchise. Yeah, and then, like, the episodic, other than that Alex Wesker delivery, which I think was great. I really loved that. The end of Barry's episode 1 really made me giggle, but I'll talk about it in the character section later on. Because I feel like the cliffhanger was kind of ruined when you get into the next episode, ironically. But yeah, I'll get into it later.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I already mentioned it, but I'm just going to harp on about it a little bit. But the reveal of Alex Wesker, I think, is still masterfully done. If I was going to do, I've just been sitting here thinking about it, and maybe one day I will, like, however many best moments of Resident Evil. This is right up there for me. Just the way that it leads up to it is so good. Obviously, you know you know that there is an overseer, and you're like, who is this mysterious person? And at the time, as I said, Alex Wesker was just a name in a file that people were speculating about. And obviously, Alex being the name that it is, everyone was just assuming that it was a man. So when you hear a voice, I'm sure some people had their suspicions, but they were like, well, it's a woman, so it's it's going to be an original character. We're well into that point of Resident Evil where everything is self-contained. And Revelations 1 didn't really have a lot of connections to any previous stuff either, so why would you assume that Revelations 2 would? But the way it builds as you get closer, there's all the propaganda about the Overseer. There's some files, some of which are missable, that kind of have you go, oh, wait, what? She's talking about Spencer. She's talking about Wesker. And those terrifying, like, constructions that use dolls that actually resemble her later form is really interesting. That cutscene is great. Yeah, I'm absolutely in agreement with you, James, when you say about choices in Resident Evil games are always good because it allows you to have those, like, aha moments. And that's always been such a part of the franchise since the beginning with the puzzle solving. And even games where there aren't a lot of puzzles, there should be stuff that makes you have aha moments. And it's stuff where you've made a decision that later impacts the gameplay and stuff like that is a way to make you do that and make you think, this is how I can use that to my advantage in the future or on a different playthrough. And Revelations 2 has plenty of great ones like that. I was pretty happy with the reuse of environments, if you like, or the retreading of environments and seeing what's different. I do enjoy that type of stuff typically. The way that Barry's episode 1 loops through the prison in a slightly different way and much quicker as well. There's much less in there to slow you down. And then I remember playing it this, so I was like, oh wow, I'm through the prison already. Is that really the end of episode 1? I forgot the forest was part of episode 1. I thought it was later. So immediately then being into brand new, scary territory that I didn't recognize in the dark. That forest section's great. And a lot of the environments in this game I really appreciate, especially this first half of the game, certainly, with the spooky buildings, spooky towns, outside environments, that kind of stuff. The first half of Revelations 2, at least, the tone is very, very good for me. It offers something unique to the series, even if it does perhaps ape Saw and Silent Hill sometimes. Kelsey, how did you feel about the first half of Revelations 2's episodes?
Yeah, you've all kind of said loads of stuff of what I've gotten written down. I do really like it. I like these first 2 episodes. I think the campiness of that is there. The us wanting Resident Evil to be a TV series like X-Files is there. This is like episodes of the X-Files. You've mentioned Saw. It's exactly, it's a lot like Saw. There's Evil Dead stuff in here as well. There is a mix of horror and campiness. And I have to say, that opening commercial, the TerraSave commercial, is amazing. It's like a Paul Verhoeven directed thing, how it absolutely takes the piss about how ridiculous these big corporation things are. And it's just, I thought as an opening, that was such a strong start, and I was in for it already. And then you mentioned the slow-mo glass thing side. I was laughing at it, but I was just kind of on board straight away. And it's also, and we'll talk more about this in a bit with visuals and stuff, but it is really cinematic. The cutscenes are really, really good, and I think that helps sell the fun story. And they really, really want this to be a TV show, and I think it's put together really strong. And so story-wise, set up, it's a virus that responds to fear, and it's kind of silly, but I didn't mind it. I was on board, and it sort of worked for me. What else did I really like? James, I think it was you mentioned some of the atmosphere. So episode 2, I really like... Well, I will say I prefer episode 2. Episode 1 is a decent enough setup, and I think the character introductions are strong. I think Barry's introduction is really strong, despite the fact at one point it looked like he was going to leave Natalia on the boat by herself, which was very, unfather-like, but oh well. So it maybe took a little while to get going. I wasn't hugely buzzing about the factory setting. I much preferred when we got to episode 2 and Claire and Moira had reunited with the other characters, and it was sort of... And here's where I started to get reminded of a hugely underrated movie from 2011, and that is Cabin in the Woods. And although that is more focused on the sort of, the sacrificing of those characters, with all the horror movie tropes, this same sort of thing, they're kind of dumped in this setting together, and it's a cabin on the beach. They're all part of this experiment, and then poor old Pedro is the one to kind of bite it at the end. And I thought the transformation stuff with him was really cool, and and I've sort of said campy and a bit silly. I really don't want that to play it down, because I do think, like I said with the gameplay, you meet the story where it is. I think it's really fun. And although this is not the, I think the stories of Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 in particular are incredibly sincere and well thought out. And even though they have campy elements, they're sort of what I would say I take them a bit more seriously, and I think they're a bit more powerful. This is a very bite-sized game. It's a bite-sized story. And I think what they do with what they've got in the story is really strong in this initial setup. And I think the characters, we'll talk about characters more in a bit, but you've all kind of said stuff I agree with. It's not, it's not doing too much that's really asking a lot of you. The novelist reference, what was his name? James, you said it loads of times. I've forgotten it already. Franz Kafka. Yeah, I did look him up, and it's a very on the nose influence to what is happening to them. He's somebody who wrote about isolated characters or something like that in really weird scenarios where stuff's happening to them, and it's like, yeah, that's what Revelations 2 is. So it's just that, it's probably the director writers are a fan of this guy and just want to drip it over the game a little bit. But yeah, and then the Alex Wesker stuff. Yeah, I have to be honest, the Alex Wesker stuff it didn't wash over me completely. I did enjoy it, but it wasn't my biggest takeaway from the game and the story. And we're going to get to episodes 3 and 4 in a minute, and I have some other stuff to say there. But I mean, yeah, fine, I suppose. I liked it, but I was just more enjoying watching the characters suffer. Was that what you said, Si? Yeah, watching them suffer. And it's done very... It does have an edge. There is definitely an edge to it. It leans more into the campy. Big man with a giant drill on his arm. Like, yeah, it's fantastic. And I was having a lot of fun with the story by the end of episode 2.
Parting words to my dear father. You poor, decrepit old man. You wanted to create a new world and rule over that world as a god. But for all your ambitions, you couldn't overcome man's most formidable enemies, age and disease. You had everything, but your crumbling body betrayed you. And then your own son snuffed out whatever pitiful entrails of life you had left, leaving you to become nothing more than a footnote in the annals of history, you failed old man. But fear not. Your dream will live on. I will take the wealth of knowledge, power, and test subjects you have given me, and succeed where you failed. I will create the new world, and I will rule over it as a god. Your legacy will have been long forgotten, but mine has only just begun. May your soul, if you ever had one, rot in torment for all eternity, and let hell be filled with the sound of your teeth gnashing incessantly.
All right, cool. Let's talk about the second half then, episode 3 and 4. This is where we have, more puzzles and stuff as Claire and Moira are led to believe that Neil will be at a nearby factory, and then they kind of end up in like Alex's most obvious Saw homage of a bunch of crazy puzzles and machinations. When they eventually reach Neil, it turns out that he's the reason they're all there. He sold all of his employees off to be test subjects so that he could get a sample of the Ouroboros virus with the intention to, and this is where one of the Revelations kind of plot threads tie back into the first game, restore the might of the FBC by, much like Lansdale had wanted to do in Revelations 1, bring them to place of power by saving people from a virus that they, in fact, put out into the world. But Alex injects Neil with Ouroboros and turns him into a tyrant, and Claire and Moira have to face him down. And one of the characters grabs the gun and does the final deed, and obviously we'll talk about that as well because that's a major moment. In terms of Barry and Natalia, we have them talking about Moira's backstory a bit more, and we get sort of the actual reason why Moira is so against firearms usage, which has only been alluded to at this point, that she accidentally shot her younger sister Polly when they were messing around with Barry's gun cabinet, which is a really interesting, as I said, like it's a nod back to Remake 1. So to have them kind of canonize Moira and Polly and Kathy as well was really interesting. But you get that information here finally in episode 3, I think it is. And then at the end of episode 3, we have Alex, the hulking mess that is Alex Wesker, staring down Natalia and being terrified and scurrying away. Episode 4 is Claire and Moira escaping the tower after Alex Wesker, they finally show down with her, and after about 2 minutes, she just shoots herself in the head mysteriously. And Claire and Moira attempt to escape the collapsing tower, at which point the tower collapses and Moira is crushed. And then the final sort of stretch of things is taking down Alex Wesker, and we have then the sort of diverging path at this point, and the canon ending being that Moira shot Neil, of course. She got over her fear of guns or whatever, and helps assist Barry against the final boss from Alex Wesker, and there's a big nice showdown between the 4 of them and Alex, with the big cliffhanger at the end, which I guess we can talk about perhaps separately. But let's talk about episode 3 and 4. There's a lot there, obviously, to dig into. Kelsey, I'm going to go to you first, since I went to you last for the last one. How did you feel about the second half of Revelations 2?
Yes. So I think, for me, this is where the story definitely picked up. But it's more about what's going on with the characters. And I'm going to jump to really sort of my strongest positives. Then I've got a few other little bits to say. I absolutely love the scene with Barry talking to Natalia about Moira and what happened. It's so weird playing this really stupid game where there's all this like nuts stuff happening and silly stuff. And I was like, oh, like it definitely was a little moment. I thought it was a superb little bit of writing, superb, awesome bit for Barry. And it came at like a real perfect point in the story for this game where I was having fun and along for the ride, and it just kind of knew right then to bring me back down. And yeah, and so obviously Natalia's on Barry's back and he's giving her a little piggyback as well as he's talking about it. And I just thought, yeah, the dialogue is hammed up, and you know, the absolute horror of this kid getting shot is kind of wild. Or does she get shot, or the gun goes off or whatever? Does she actually get shot? I can't remember. Polly,
I think she does.
She does get injured.
Actually gets injured from this, and that's horrific. But the way it's done, and kind of in the context of being a Resident Evil fan, I think from the beginning, and the depth that adds to Barry and this little moment in this fun story, yeah, it was magic. I absolutely loved that bit. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of sing the praises there. But sorry, I've lost my way now because I just got so caught up on that bit. Episode 4. Oh, look, a giant underground lab, but it's not underground, it's up a lift. That's what I put on my notes here. Because you go, obviously, they go into the section where into the lab, which I thought was quite fun. It felt like a bit like I was in Metal Gear Ray there. There's files about like transferring your mind into another body and stuff like that, isn't there? Which was another little, that was like, okay, this story, it's picking up now. The self-destruction sequence, more Resident Evil stuff in there, but I was really like, again, like with the first 2 episodes, it's so short. It's really not long. It's so short, and they're ticking lots of these boxes that I think original fans like me enjoyed. And because the dialogue is so funny, and I mean that in like a good way, there's so many brilliant one-liners in this, from Moira, from the sub-characters. And I just think, even though all the stuff with the bracelets is kind of binned off a little bit, and then they're talking about transferring your mind into another body, I don't know. The characters are all really carrying it, and we'll talk about them more in a little bit. But despite me not really caring too much about the whole Alex Wesker scenario, I was so engrossed with Barry and him wanting to reunite with Moira when he does, and that cutscene with them together. And I mean, I won't say the lines because it's just gonna give you more stuff to bleep, sigh. But like, it's so cool seeing Barry and Moira reunite, and I think that's, as much as I love Claire in this game, by the end of episode 4, this is Barry's game, and we always joke kind of how he hasn't really been given the time that he needs in Resident Evil, but this, it does so much for him, and I by the time the game had finished, I felt like I had played a Barry story that does the character justice, and all the silly little virus stuff around it didn't really matter to me because I loved the story of him going after Moira, and and being that fatherly figure and kind of opening up to Natalia, and that's the main thing I took away from the story. I just enjoyed that part so much. And that's not even thinking about Barry's other little moments himself throughout the game, where he's delivering all the one-liners, all his references he gives to the other games and stuff. He's had his fill of mansions and all this kind of thing. It's so on the nose sometimes, but I just had so much fun because the gameplay is straightforward and easy enough to get on with. And then the story is so... I was going to say brief again. It's not brief. It's just, it's very focused, and it's very difficult to find much wrong with it, because if you meet it where it is, as I keep saying, it's perfectly enjoyable as a Resident Evil story, as an episode in a series. I mean, this is 4 episodes, but to me, this could be an episode of a longer series. I mentioned the X-Files again earlier, and I think it's put together really well by the time the game wraps up.
I think you're right. Like, a big part of the strength of the story is the characterization. And I'm going to save a lot of what I've got to say about that for the next bit. But I do think that the slow sort of revelation of why Barry and Moira are at odds kind of coming at this point is really good. The where it comes, like you said, is great. How it's delivered is great. And it's so believable as well, where it's like Barry's sort of instant reaction of essentially, panic came across as, and maybe it was a little bit chastising Moira, so that's kind of like burns their relationship, and it just goes worse and worse from there. And it's really nice to have like him have this touching moment of sincerity with Natalia, and them talk about it's really, really great. There's a bunch of awesome character stuff in these 2 episodes. One of the most genius, organic, choose your ending moments in gaming that you can absolutely miss. Like, if you're playing it on split screen co-op, then it's kind of, and you're both pushing forward, Moira's going to get there first. I think she happens to be closer, which is kind of why the game deliberately shows you that at the end of the cutscene, so that you pick Moira and get to the gun quicker. But it's entirely possible you just go, no, I'm playing as Claire, to put me as Claire, or I was last playing as Claire, or whatever. Claire's the one that handles guns. So you could very easily get the bad ending, if you like, the non-canon ending. So I really love how the ending choice is laid out here. In terms of the rest of the chapter, the pace and the flow of this is a little bit different to the first 2, because Claire and Moira's chapter 4 is exceptionally brief, which means that that's why their chapter 3 feels really long. I felt their chapter 3 sort of section went on for perhaps a bit too long, but also it doesn't help that they're doing a sewer, so it's kind of dull, as sewers tend to be at this point. It's a bit overplayed, and then unfortunately, as Barry and Natalia, you do have to kind of go through there again, although it's done differently. You're kind of moving across rather than through, so it doesn't burn me in the way that I'm back here again. But yeah, this chapter 3, a bit of a mixed bag for locations. Chapter 4, less so, but again, maybe a little bit long in the tooth for Barry and Natalia leading up. What I will say is, though, props to Revelations 2, because if I haven't said it before, look, I hate mine shaft levels, or anything to do with mines. Just get them out of my games. I'm so sick of mine levels. It's such a generic design that so many games have done, and Resident Evil has done it so many times. So when I knew that it was coming up, I was like, I remember now, there's a mine in this game, isn't there? Hey, I didn't hate this one. I actually quite enjoyed the mine in Revelations 2, so I'm quite impressed by that. Steve, how do you feel about the latter half of Revelations 2, episode 3 and 4?
From a settings kind of vibes thing, I appreciate a lot more that the environments are basically parceled off, bar one sewer section between the 2.
Yeah.
Claire and Moira, obviously, in chapter 3, they get the factory, which in Moira's own words is, of course, the factory had to be a kind of factory. It's she's getting exasperated. A lot of fun one-liners from her. I appreciate this a lot more, because there's a lot of like twisted, like repurposed environments that have been made for Alex's torture game. If you like, you've got an abattoir, you've got like what appears to be some kind of ex-Soviet like administrative building, and then a winery that's exploding. Very fun. Let's cap it off with a sewer. Not the best look. Yeah. And then obviously you go into the big fight with Neil, and are we officially recognizing this man as a tyrant just because he's a bit bulky and has a weird arm? That feels a bit.
He's most of the way there for me, yeah.
I mean, this game books a lot of trends in that the big virus monster at the end is semi-conscious, and you can tell who or what they are and what they plan to do. Which is nice. The fact that both of them are very verbal in abusing you during the boss fights. Barry's section, I kind of vibe with, up until a point where you go through a abandoned mine, as Size pointed out, and then you go deeper in from the exterior into the interior, and I suffer with asthma. So going through the poison cloud mines was a bit, the music's even like kind of got this like twisted bubbling of kind of thing, which if you ever started struggling to breathe with that asthma attack, it hits home quite well. The sound design in that bit, very strenuous. And then you have, it's like a grapple crane in a scrapyard. Is that right? My brain's kind of misfiring a bit here. That bit was tedious, did not like. Narratively speaking, though, I appreciate the fact that, one, they are now trying to hunt down Alex Wesker, and every time they get to a cutscene bar, the final one, Barry immediately gets ejected from the conversation by means of shoulder charge. Very funny. But I don't want to get too far into story, because I feel like other people do that more justice. I appreciate that Monster Alex's entire thing basically boils down to her plan did not go entirely how she wanted it because of a small snafu right at the end, in that she was trying to preserve a continuity of self by shooting herself in the head, and that's why this has all gone a bit awry. And it reminds me of Soma by Frictional Games, I believe, which does a whole continuity of self thing, but a vastly less ultra-violent and torture and murdery thing, and I thought that was rather kind of neat. The cliffhanger annoys me, much like everyone, because it will never be followed up on. And of course, Barry gets his classic RE1 one-liners before the final boss fight. We love to see more of that, please. It's cheesy.
Yes, I think just to sort of build on what you were saying there, I think Neil's like death scene is horrible in the best possible way. The way his body writhes around is really cool. But then, for me, you sort of lose the actual horror of that into Crazy Monster Town because he starts maniacally laughing as a tyrant. I was like, oh, okay. But to be fair to Neil, he didn't inject himself, which is a rare move for a Resident Evil villain. Someone else did it to him. So that's refreshing, at least. And
he's kind of into it, Si. It
seems like it's, I was about to say, it seems like he's kind of okay with it. So, in terms of Alex, I get that the point is that Alex takes it away from you, but it sucks for me as a fan of that character that she gets so little screen time as herself before her death. And it's done outside of an FMV. It's just done as like in-engine, your camera is where it would normally be. You're just kind of locked watching it happen. It's really interesting that it kind of robs that moment from you. But obviously it's a big part of the story of Alex, trying to transfer her mind into Natalia and it unfortunately going wrong. And this whole thing about as you get close to the end, and there's a bunch of really good files in this of varying different sort of kinds, but Alex sort of struggling with the idea that there's two of her now. What happened? Well, there will be two of her when Natalia, her consciousness wakes up in Natalia's brain. Then what happens? And now maybe she's regretting it, and there can only be one, and this sort of thing. So she's kind of doing that whole thing, and also just the fact that she has to face up with the fact that she's a monster and maybe she didn't plan for that, and we'll talk about that a bit later. In terms of the cliffhanger of Natalia waking up as Alex, it's just annoying. Again, we talked about this on the What Culture Gaming podcast episode on Monday, plug. But the fact that this game is 10 years old and we haven't followed up on the fact that there is a ticking time bomb of a evil mastermind in Barry Burton's spare bedroom and has been for a decade is very strange. But there you go. That's what happens when you're a side game, I guess. James, what did you make of the second half of Revelations 2?
To speak more about Alex a second, her whole thing was like the typical boring thing again. Well, the characters I think we're really going to go deep into, but she wanted to be a god, just like Oswell, just immortal, right? Just like Albert did. And like the main thing with a god is that they can't die. They're immortal in some way, right? So like overcoming that by shooting herself in the head, like the main fear of a god is another god. She basically killed herself, a god killing a god. Like, so it could be that. But but there is a lot of kind of, you have to what's the word? You have to rein in your expectations with that kind of stuff. You get like with 3 and 4, you get like this pretentious ride with Alex Wesker that continues. She's still on over the blower talking to you. The thing the thing that kind of made me giggle. Actually, there's a lot that made me giggle about this. But like, the thing that pops out is the myth of Prometheus was used here. During like the butchery and the wine place. The only link I could find is like Prometheus being a stand-in for Albert and Oswell in her eyes. But that's like a twist of the myth itself and the concept of it. It really felt quite shoehorned in. It was, oh, here's just a myth of Prometheus. It's very vague and weird, you know. But yeah, it could also be evidence that Alex Wesker was losing her mind, just like Albert did, you know, and Oswald did. But Prometheus is a very important storyline. And, you know, only 3 years before this, a very important movie came out for me that actually, you know, explained the whole thing, you know. So, yeah, it was very strange to see that and just collecting its liver and putting it back in. It was just strange. We get that really big decision that we make in episode 3 with Moira to overcome her fear of guns and assisting Claire or letting Claire take Neil out. That is my favorite story element of this game. It's very simple, you know, but it gives you that control, that agency there. And it does technically lead to the same ultimate result of Natalia being Alex, but the good ending is technically more sinister, which is quite cool. Like, because I think like with the bad ending, she just walks off, but now she is in Barry, as you said, in Barry's bedroom, just smiling to herself, reading a book. You know, now like Alex is part of this trusted family within the RE universe. Instead of just walking away menacingly, you know, it's cool. However, there are some glaring holes in this story at this point that they didn't clear up. And I couldn't find any information about this, like the fact that Moira and Claire still have this virus within them.
Yeah, probably.
The bracelet was just a notifier of their fear, not the virus
itself. Didn't they blow up all the servers and stuff, James? Didn't they blow up all the servers? I thought that's what's turned... Didn't that destroy the bracelets? When after Alex...
Oh, the bracelets are just a notifier of the fear. They're a notification. They're a Fitbit, right?
They still work by the time of Barry as well, because Alex
I
threatens.
Thought those server things.
Alex threatens and Natalia everyone in the end.
Like I tried to look. There's no vaccine for T-Phobos. Like there's a vaccine for Progenitor, but there's no vaccine. Neil tried to get a Progenitor vaccine for it, right? But there's no vaccine. So we got these two ticking time bombs. You know, in the Resi universe right now. You could argue that Moira overcame her fear, but we don't just have one fear. We can generate fears and traumas.
Yeah.
I said Moira's bracelet's also red, like when she returns. So she's fine. Don't know about Claire, but Moira's going to be okay.
Okay, so Claire's... Okay, yeah. So Claire's this ticking time bomb at the moment. But I doubt that'll ever be elaborated on again. I'm also
James,
confused.
She's been infected by a virus, which now means that she can stay young forever. That's the female protagonist logic.
I'm also confused why Barry's having a flashback of saving Claire from the ocean, but never remembered this. Like it wasn't a trauma. He just remembered it. This is when the story starts to fall apart for me, because it's like they deliberately the two POVs are 6 months apart, and I feel like that part was only put in to very loosely connect the episodes. It's I just suddenly forgot. If they wanted to explain it more, maybe they had some BTS or something, right? But they should have explained it more, because it just made no sense.
According to Reddit, there's a file in the game that says, over time, you assimilate to the virus and it's no longer harmful. You just have to not succumb to your fears for that set time. I don't remember reading that, but but apparently, it's Reddit, so take it with a pinch of salt. But apparently that's what...
Okay, well, I mean, that is kind of cool, though, if it has, like, a temporary... Which would mean that, like... which would make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Alex was, like, trying to push them to do things. But anyway, Claire still got the virus. But yeah, to finish on my story opinions though with something positive, I think Sai and Kels, and actually I think we've all mentioned it, but like I really enjoyed reading the secret notes in this game. As you discover the collectibles, even with the typos, and there was some translation issues as well.
Yes,
I noticed.
Yeah.
But yeah, hearing from peers was really lovely. Like I almost choked up reading that. Like that was really nice to see. And the biographies, they added quite a bit of context for the game that was really needed, and gave a really hefty handful of references as well, which this game has tons of. Yeah, so like those things, I did like if you don't, like you said earlier, Kels, if you don't think about it too much, yeah, it's fine. And I really wish I didn't think about it too much. But yeah, when I started to kind of go into the weeds with it, I was like, wait, none of this makes sense. And but yeah, I did enjoy it. Like, I think if I was to give it like a score, I think like the mid-70s is fine if I'm going to score the story. So it makes sense that people would score this game in that mark. Yeah, that's all I've got to say. I could have gone deeper into the weeds with it, but
yeah, that's cool. Let's everybody's talked a bit about various characters along the way, but let's take a little bit more time to just sort of dig into any other character notes everyone has about the cast of Revelations 2, which was deliberately it was crafted to be a bit smaller. So yeah, we have Clara and Barry, Moira and Natalia, Alex, and I guess Neil as well, and then a couple of extras. I just wanted to kind of echo what everyone has already said there in the last story, but particularly about Barry in this game. He's kind of, without a doubt, the star of this game. And whilst he had Gaiden, it's so nice that we got you may laugh.
A proper Barry game.
A proper Barry game. And also there's some, and I said about The Last of Us, and I don't want this, I do think this was done for genuinely the right reasons. You could cynically say they wanted old man, young girl pairing like with The Last of Us for this. But in a way it's kind of cool to have old man Barry and go back to the character after all this time as a retired sort of soldier who is purely here for his own reasons to save his daughter and stuff. And what the special thing about this is the fact that immediately this feels like 1996 Barry specifically, and it's glorious for it. You could draw a line from the remake Barry, certainly, but this feels particularly informed by the Barry that the wider world of gaming remembers, the silly Master of Unlocking Barry, and as you said, that's a line that he gives again. And we talked about this way back in season 1. I was quite surprised when people didn't pick remake Barry as the best Barry at that time, because he's like the most realistic, rounded version of the character we love. But I too have come to see the light of Rev 2 Barry supremacy. I think Michael McConaughey did an absolutely brilliant job of bringing 96 Barry to the present day and not just grounding it in a way that like stops the game. It allows the game to be movie silly, but it stops it short of getting absolutely ridiculous and just nonsense. But more than that, as you said, Kelsey, like just genuinely touching. And even though a lot of the dialogue can be hokey, some of it's really good. And for my money, for the payoff, not in isolation, but for the payoff of it, he gets the single best line in the series. Right at the end, where he says, "I'll always need you, but right now, I have this." Yeah. Which is just the perfect way to make like a funny wink and a nod back, but also to make it mean something after you've played this game for however many hours. It's incredible. Like, if we never saw Barry again and that was the last we saw of him, it would be a shame, but it's a hell of a way to bow out. I've got other notes on the rest of the characters, but everyone else has said a bit of Barry, and I just wanted to get my piece out there. Steve, how do you feel about the characters in Revelations 2? Go nuts.
100% on board with the Barry. Yeah, James is going to say something like he's like Joel, but I kind of feel like Barry's enough of his old self that he is a charming older version of RE1 Barry, as Sai's already said.
Yeah, dad joke Barry.
I fully accept that he's probably never coming back, but if he ever does, I would like that we get Michael McConaughey to do another take at him. Some people will probably say Ed Smarin because remake and all that, but I kind of feel like older Barry. Plus, Michael McConaughey still works. That's pretty good. I know he still does anime and dubs to this day. I want to talk about A Tale of Two Claires. Because I really do dig Moira Burton, but I also can see she is prototype remake 2 Claire. Whereas the Claire in this, is basically a older, more hardened Claire who's a bit more seasoned, a bit more prepared. Doesn't tend to panic, except in that she's got a blinders in this for one character, and that's Neil. I find that interesting that we've gone from basically. In terms of character continuity, the last time we would have seen them would have been with Rani in
Degeneration.
Airport Degeneration. My brain just could not remember. But she just seems so much more serious now, and it's peculiar that I can't see any other iteration of Claire kind of swooning for the dude, and that kind of makes me a bit. I know. I'm sorry. I know you're a big Neil shipper. All right, I just don't see it. And that puzzles me. There's a sequence in chapter 2 where they meet Natalia in the quote unquote present of the time, and it really me off.
Yeah, no,
even Moira shades it by going, what about the girl later on? Too bloody right. To their credit, though, I don't think we still don't know who the voice actress is. They did a great job of being Alison Court without actually being Alison Court, so I'll give them that.
Yeah.
All the standouts, obviously, Natalia's fine as a charming young little girl who's got a lot going on and a bit crazy. I think the opening line is probably the best one, though, where she's like, I'm not going to be safer here. Are you going to leave me here? That's pretty much her character summed up until screaming and, Barry. Okay. And Neil, evil Peter Parker. I can't disassociate Yori Lowenfall, and it's basically black suit Peter Parker without being black suit Peter Parker, especially when it goes off the deep end. So for the FBC, as a through line, if we do get another Revelations game that has somehow got a novel running in the background, can the FBC still turn up as surprise heels? Because that's great. I like that.
Yeah,
that's the best callback we had. Also, just want to point it out there because I don't know if we're going to ever mention it ever again. This is a stronger interquel than Revelations 1 was.
Agreed.
Because we get callbacks to RE5 in terms of, not just Ouroboros and its use, characters mentioning it. We've obviously got the notes that reference Piers and I believe Shevers in some of them, even taking the mick out of Chris's muscle building, which is nice. There's character notes from Stuart, the butler. They're all the extra files, aren't they?
I believe so, yeah.
Intriguing character. Why has he hung himself? And then there's Alex Wesker, who is a tale of two characters in herself. Future Self is a bitter, angry old hag who's hunting down technically her alternate self. And the first one's just a smug git who shoots herself in the head while spouting poetry, torturing people. I kind of don't vibe with either of them.
Okay. Interesting. I think Alex is really cool. And as I say, I think we've been robbed of not having more of her.
I love her actress. And the line delivery and everything.
Performance is great.
Yeah.
But that said, I don't see what else they could do with her. And as James sort of alluded to there, her whole thing with Prometheus and the way she sort of views her brother as this failure and for the lofty goal that he was going to, and then she just winds up in the same fate is actually really good because when you talk about it, the Wesker program, they came through the same sort of programming. They had their brains twisted in the same way, so them both meeting the same fate through their own sort of egotistical, slightly different ends is very appropriate. But it's just a shame we didn't see more of her, so I think that's why it kind of sucks for me. Also, for what it's worth, her monster design's absolutely horrifying and one of the best in the franchise. Like, in terms of known characters who become monsters, it's something else to look at.
She's creepier with the cloak on than her final.
Right, I think I agree. I'm with you on Claire. I think the voice is fine. The personality is very confused. I'm not against her focus being that making sure Neil is okay and the implications of him being a romantic pairing. But that one scene where she basically like shouts at Natalia or looks straight through her, and all this kind of stuff is really, really weird, and people have rightfully pointed out stuff like that. And I've alluded to it at the beginning of this episode, her line referencing Code Veronica, Steve, and the gun line is
taking the wrong point away.
It's sweet, but it doesn't feel like it. Yeah, it's not really who Claire is. She could learn the lesson from it, absolutely, but for her to quote it verbatim just seems like reference for the sake of reference, which is a shame because a lot of the other connections are pretty good. One of those for me, Natalia, I think is a fine character, works as a centerpiece. There's argument, obviously, to be made that she's essentially Sherry 2.0, but for what it's worth, I like that she connects Revelations 2 to Revelations 1. Being a Terra Grigia survivor, it makes a nice change. We don't have it these days. Everything is a nod back to Raccoon City again at this point. But it's nice to have something to talk about other than Raccoon City. So to have a survivor of some other incident was pleasant. And Moira's great. I think a lot of her dialogue is pretty cringy, but she also is also a 20-year-old hothead, even though she does speak like a 14-year-old sometimes who's just figuring out how to swear. I've said this about Rebecca before, and it's true of Claire as well, but having characters who aren't necessarily soldiers, but in the case of Claire and Moira, relief workers who just so happen to be relief workers against very dangerous things, adds some variety for what Resident Evil can do and the setups that it can have and the characters and the journeys it can take you on. So Moira adds value beyond her connections to Barry, I think. But we probably need to see her in another game to see it, separate from the Barry thing. Here, she's kind of... I feel like she suffers a little bit by being, when all is said and done, a bit of a tool for Barry's ultimate conclusion. Though that said, and we'll talk about the DLC, her getting her own little spin-off definitely helps. Like her own little time in the sun, I think it's nice. So if she would have come back at some point, I would have been happy about that. But unfortunately, I think most things pre-RE engine we might never see again, sadly. I've rambled. James, thoughts on characters that you haven't mentioned?
Let's go to Kel's first for all the good news.
I'll keep it fairly brief. I just want to say, Si, like you gave me goosebumps with your Barry thing, and the way you topped it off with this final piece of dialogue. Like, yeah, I was waiting for someone to say that. It's so perfect. Absolutely love it. Yep, it's Barry's greatest appearance in the franchise, even though there's only been a few. Love it, love it, love it. His development hits really hard, especially that stuff about his guilt. It's just, yeah, it's so good. And I don't see him as a Joel thing at all. It's so weird. The Last of Us did not cross my mind when I played this game at all. I mean, I can see it now when people say it, but yeah. Natalia is such a Sherry 2.0 that she even climbs up when she climbs up a ledge, she does the leg lift that Sherry does exactly the same. Yeah, so there's another reference for you. I do. That's cute. I will kind of, I suppose, go to bat for Moira a little bit. I love this. So her personality, and you mentioned the cringy dialogue. I sort of buy into it. Barry swears a lot in this as well, and I really buy into this idea that he was one of these dads at home that probably, taught his kids to swear and thought it was funny, maybe, because he thought it was cheeky kind of thing. That's the vibe I got from it, because when they reunite and she's like, yeah, F it right up the A, and they're sort of smiling at each other, it's like I think she's learnt that from him, and she's very much her father's daughter. And, in my game, she did overcome her fear of weapons and she saved the day. And and I think that I completely see how you could think she's a tool. I mean, a tool, not a tool, a tool. But like James said, like at least she's got a crowbar and she can do stuff. It's like there's sort of more going on with her. She feels useful. She feels as a character. I mean, she completely overshadows Claire, who I think is. Yeah, Claire was just kind of absent for me. She's in the game, but it's not. You've all touched on it. It's kind of confusing, and yeah, I mean, I think of all the Claire performances, and it's just like this one's fine, and she's overshadowed by the Moira and Barry stuff, and so not too much to say on Claire really, because I think it is Moira and Barry's story, and they work in tandem, and Yeah, and Natalia and Alex for me are sort of the more MacGuffin side of things than somebody like Moira is. So yeah, I think she works, for what this brief outing is. Gabe's helicopter crash was unintentionally hilarious. I don't know if anybody else thought that, but
It was.
yeah,
It
it's poor another poor supporting character.
Flew so low for no reason. Like,
There's a few moments like that. You've touched on My Life is Awesome and like other little bits of dialogue we've hinted at. This game, it feels like, and I sort of mentioned this maybe later in the conclusion, it feels like they had so much fun making this, and I don't know what other podcast we talked about, but it's one of these times where maybe the reins are off a little bit because the Eye of Sauron isn't really watching them as much because it's not a mainline game. So they sort of have some fun and do what they want, which feels that it's a bit more free form, with just the script and stuff. But it works. It all works together. And character wise, yeah, it's Barry's game. And Barry and Moira for me were the strong takeaways, and less interested with the Alex stuff. I kind of like what it hints to, and you've all talked about it in the story section with the cliffhanger, and it's a shame we haven't had it picked up because there's something there. And Si, you've talked about the positives of Alex Wesker. I completely agree, and as you've said, it's just too brief. There's just not enough here. So for me, it's all about it's the Burton show. So. Yeah, absolutely loved them in this game.
Nice. James, then, come on then. Hit us with it.
James, if you say a bad word about Barry...
oh, get ready. You're about to have an aneurysm.
Oh, no.
Okay.
He's not got one bad word, he's got words.
I have several. At least 5. I will mention first, I mentioned earlier on about a cliffhanger thing that made me kind of laugh, and it was it was the bit where Natalia says, Moira's dead, and Barry says, what? And that delivery is great. I love the delivery. But then we go into the next episode, nothing. Like, Barry's mostly fine. I feel like that kind of trauma should really affect you. But
Fair.
Barry, no.
He's
like
in disbelief.
This, sure, okay. So Barry hasn't been as much of a fan favorite as me. For me, if people have watched our like Steve and I's RE1 playthrough, you kind of get a feel of how I feel about Barry. I do love him in certain ways, but I dislike him in others. And Revelations 2 reinforces that feeling in me. This is a man who thought his daughter was upset with him and rebelled because he shouted at her for shooting her sister. That is a quote from Barry's mouth during that little soft... He never mentions, let's talk about the fact that this man, a firearms specialist for an elite force, not only left his gun locker open, but left it with bullets in the chamber. This wasn't enough. This wasn't once brought up in the game. You're just meant to assume he has this silent regret for it. You tack on the fact of the minor betrayal in RE1 that Barry has. Barry is a dangerous fool, and to top it all off, he brings Natalexia back home, and I'm surprised he's consistently relied upon by anybody. Right, but this could also be why he was employed, because he's an idiot. There you go.
Wow. Goodness. That's me.
Gamer no grumbles. To go on to the other stuff, which is very much like what you guys are saying, I have some minor issues with Claire. There are some circles online that believe she could have been intended to be Jill initially, which makes sense, based on the weird scene when they first meet Natalia with Moira and the Claire isn't good with kids line. That, it didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Paired with the sandwich line as well, none of that really connects. So I'm kind of 75% into the camp that it was meant to be Jill. The way she kind of acts as well, the aloofness. and stuff. The Neil thing still doesn't really make sense, but yeah, it was odd. Yeah, and Claire didn't really feel like Claire most of this game for me, but she did look sick with that new haircut in the helicopter. She looked great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess like I was getting some opinions about Moira from folks while I was streaming. I guess people don't really like Moira too much, but I just saw a raging teen with a fool of a dad, really. So I forgave that character. The struggle DLC is where I really started to enjoy her, though, because she had a lot of introspection during that DLC that really fleshed her out, that I really enjoyed. Her character writing, it grew, which I enjoyed. And yeah, like I really liked Alex, the BOW Alex, first phase and second phase, which I'll go into later on. But it got to a point that Alex's motives kind of made my eyes roll. Like I've seen it time and time again in Resi and other media. It's like immortality, chasing to be a god, boring, yawn. But she did get a wish anyway with Natalia, and now I guess Capcom don't really know what to do with it. So,
Yeah,
like,
certainly.
we have this Alex 2.0 that is walking around the streets of Asda right now with Barry as he collects his 2 loaves of bread. What will she do next? Who knows? Nothing. It's probably the answer.
Real scamp and put a 3rd loaf of bread in his trolley.
I need to ask a serious question. How many of you are angry at me right now?
I do see what you're saying about, it's a really stupid mistake by Barry, but also, because as I said earlier, when he was talking about it and describing that moment, it's so shocking. But then while you were talking, I was like, okay, so why did they do this? And maybe it's like, if we want to get serious, maybe it's like a message about, you hear all these statistics that if you have guns in your house, you're more likely to shoot each other than you are like, an attacking intruder. So Barry's, he's a veteran, but he's getting on. He's forgot to lock his box, and this is the accident that's happened. He talks about his guilt, and I don't want to disregard Barry's entire sort of worth based over a silly mistake that
I will.
I will. So yeah, I
think
do
it's
get it, but yeah,
it's a very interesting, valid point that you've definitely raised. My response would be, hey, he's a guy who just went through a ridiculous traumatic experience in the Spencer Mansion. Maybe he leaves everything loaded because he's got massive paranoia. I ain't forgiving anyone for it. It's not a good idea in general. But maybe that's it. But I mean, it's an interesting point. Certainly, I hadn't thought about.
It makes it easier. It makes it easier for me to digest Barry, right? When I think about him in the same way, kind of like I think about Chris. Where Chris is somebody who's used because he's really bad at keeping a team together. Barry is used because he's really crap with guns.
See, I'm going to just say that I respect your opinion. I disagree with it. I don't think one mistake can write off a character permanently. Though to ride the Joel comparison, to be fair, not having any agency in the end of spoilers for The Last of Us Part 1, any agency in the final choice that man makes, that kind of writ him off for me as well. So I kind of get it.
Oh, I don't know, not for me.
Yeah, I actually, by the way, it is a joke with Joel. I actually never thought about Joel when I played this, when it came to Barry. That's just a joke. But yeah, I am disappointed in you, Barry, you fictional character. I'm disappointed.
Right. Let's talk about BOWs then. This game does have, I think, and somebody said, I think, Steve, you said that Claire and Moira don't fight a lot of variation early on, and you're absolutely right. But I think overall, when you look at them all, there is a decent amount of variety for the game. That's how I feel anyway, but I'm curious how everyone feels about the BOWs. Stuff they liked, stuff they didn't like. Steve, in fact, let's start with you. How do you feel about the monsters in this game?
It's literally a split down the middle because I cannot stand the first half. Like, the Afflicted just look like angry dudes that are red-coloured, covered with barbed wire. It's just pissed off gammonry. It's not fun at all. The Iron Head looks like let's take movie Silent Hill Pyramid Head and then replace his head and his weapon. Cool. Okay. I appreciate that it's got a different, unique weak spot in that it's the chest. But okay, and their other unique enemy, are you ready for it? It's a fat man with a cannon. Ooh. I, for one, am really excited and erect at the prospect. But there is a lot of like saving graces.
Don't say the invisible enemies.
Barry's half of the campaign. Ugh. I actually no word of a lie, right? I think they are employed fantastically because maybe it's just the way I play, zipping back and forth between them. The fact that you have to use Natalia to sight the Glasp and then fight them, or you just throw a smoke bomb if if you're not confident. Fair enough. Smoke bomb fully reveals them, by the way, for anyone who's doing really hard modes.
But I have to keep all these smoke bombs for the end of the game, Steve.
That's a you problem. Aesthetically, the second half of the enemies are absolutely terrifying. I not so much the Rotten. I appreciate the Rotten as a beautiful nod to V-Act in a twisted way that if you look at them hard enough, they are the Afflicted, just 6 months later, falling apart, shambling corpses, using the moveset of RE6's zombies, but we won't talk about that. The Revenants are fantastic. They are basically just Ouroboros in a bag, and that bag is flesh-shaped. And Alex has clearly had a field day sewing weapons onto them just so they can kill everything on the island. And they look amazing and they move amazing. I just wish that they did more than screech and slobber around because they look like they're from the wrong game. They look like something from The Suffering or Silent Hill. But they are fun to fight and engage with. Even if, this is probably more from my raid mode side of things because that's I shoot every limb until I find the core or I'm going to get hurt. And that's just fine. Boss-wise, though, I hate that little blob thing. Like, I don't know how to pronounce it. It looks like Dulga.
Dulga, yeah.
It's just, the top of it is loads of sewn-up faces. And that reminds me of Doom 2, so that gets past. But generally speaking, the second half monsters, I appreciate the Rotten and the Revenants a whole lot more than just rage dudes with barbed wire around the face.
Yeah, largely in agreement with you on a lot of that stuff. The Dulga having an OHKO move sucks, or more specifically, where you face them most of the time sucks, which is really annoying. I agree. I think the Revenants are great. Probably the standout thing in the whole game in terms of monsters. The fantastic use of asymmetrical character balance. Possibly the big standout of that, where you switch to one character just to check where the weak point is and then swap back and take it out. Glasps are obviously a big part of that as well. Super memorable. Bit of a pain in the ass to fight solo, I think. But again, I played this game split screen co-op for the first time. So I was spoilt by that, I think, being the intended way to play. Being able to communicate with your other player. It's a shame that... So we haven't really talked about this, but the... co-op is split screen only and not online, which is bizarre unless you find a way around it. It takes away kind of some of the enjoyment of those two enemies. James, thoughts on monsters?
We still talking about Barry.
Oh my
hey,
God.
Very good.
Yeah, I might upset people again here, actually. So,
oh boy.
So the BMWs and Rev 2, mostly they're kind of uninspired in the most part. Like, you have a few standouts, and I think they're going to be the same as everybody's. But like the Rotten and the Afflicted, they were fine, in italics. I would have liked a bit more separation with them, other than one being fast, the other being slow. The Revenants are just poopier Regenerators. And
what?
I didn't like them. Okay, I didn't like them. Okay, I said
it's fine. I'm not saying you're not allowed to.
I am.
I was just seeing Regenerators again, and I was like, it felt reused. I know there was a different, but it's literally just putting the thermal camera on by switching to a character, seeing where the weak point was and shooting it.
What? I could see that.
It reminded me directly of that, and So I don't know how to pronounce their name, but it might have been Orthrus or Orthrus, the dogs with the pig heads.
Yeah.
Interesting, but I hate dogs in games, so They didn't really add much to the gameplay for me, other than just being a little bit of an annoyance sometimes. So I just crowbarred them like every time, and that was kind of annoying to deal with because you're trying to chase this all through with a crowbar. Yeah, but to get to the positives, though, there were three main highlights for me. The clasps were terrifying, even on multiple playthroughs, because you'll go into, say you take one clasp out, like at the end of the game, you could take one clasp out, you go down to a corridor, come back up, and they've spawned another one in there. And several times I've just walked into it and died instantly, you know, which was cool. I like those guys. Yeah. And then, and then at the end of Claire's run as well, there's a bunch. There's like 6, I think. Actually, I think there's a medal for getting all 6 if you can kill all 6.
Yeah.
And and at the end of the sluice section as well. Though I figured out if you could lob a if you could position that flammable tank at the top, right at the end of the sluice area, the dry sluice area, and then throw a bomb, you can kill everything in that room, so you don't have to worry about anything at the end of there, which was super fun to do. And then and I will never try to kill a clasp with a knife. They terrify me. I can't.
Yeah. That screen effect and the sound when you get too close.
It's so disorientating.
Really effective. Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally you got the Doriga. Well, not finally, but you got the Doriga. For some reason I read it as Doriga. I'm not sure, but what I liked about the Doriga is that it really slows the game down. Like, beforehand, I found that when I was fighting things, I was really fast paced. I was trying to dodge everywhere, you know. But with the Doriga, you really have to watch where you're standing, and you have to be very particular about your positioning and your angles with it. Right? It was cool. But the other thing about these guys is that I was talking to Steve about this a few days ago. They reminded me, and I got the name wrong, Steve, but they reminded me of what are called the vulture or carrion bees that are in South America.
Okay.
Which have these hives that they make, which look awful to look at. Like, they essentially have like 2 types of honey or like storage, one for honey and one for this like meat protein enzyme that they take from carrion corpses. And these Dorigas kind of look like the hive system of these vulture bees. Very cool. And limbs everywhere. They're really tough. But the star is Alex in all her forms. Yeah. We had our tyrant in Neil, but her design is in my top 5 of like unique RE bosses to date, and always has been. Like, it hasn't changed. Like, I might want to do a video about that someday, but like,
that'd be cool.
She's very recognizable, weird but still familiar. Her cloaked phase, like cloaked phase, like 2. So I would name her human form phase 1, cloaked phase 2. That appearance gave me a very Dimitrescu vibe, like keeping all that body inside her through pure will and spite, maybe. But yeah, amazing model for Alex. I'll love it because I did love when she just explodes and starts going into the vents, going pure xenomorph. Like, it was, I love that design of her, like just the metal plates on her, how she just looks like she's been ramshackled and put together by machinery, a spine made of metal as well.
Yeah.
It was a dope, really cool boss. Definitely that's the main highlight in terms of BOWs.
For ones that have been mentioned, the Orthus, the dog thing or whatever, like, they're very meh as they go. There's like, well, we need to have a dog enemy in Resident Evil game, so we put this one and we stuck a pipe through its head. There you go, just like meh. The Iron Head feels like it should be way tougher than it is, considering that it calls back to Executioner from RE5 or indeed Pyramid Head. And the Vulcan Blubber, which is the big fat guy with a cannon, as Steve mentioned, feels really weird and out of place here compared to everything else, because it inexplicably has a big pot of lava that it shoots at people. It's just the whole thing's kind of ridiculous. And Neil Tyrant as a design is pretty cool. Ouroboros Tyrant. We always say it all the time. We said it earlier. Resident Evil making use of cut content is always cool, and this feels like a use of the Ouroboros turret design from the Resident Evil 5 beta kind of coming full circle is really neat. Kelsey, any more notes on BOWs?
I can't believe I'm going last, and I'm either going to make myself sound really stupid, and no one has mentioned Heisenberg's factory from Resident Evil Village, because it feels like the enemies in this game are a massive precursor to the Soldats in Village. And I was sat here waiting like, oh, who's going to take it away from me? And no one mentioned it. I don't know if I've just made a connection that is... I'm not saying that there's a literal connection. I just mean design-wise, they obviously had these enemies in this game, and it feels like that sort of theme and style of these... And James, you sort of mentioned there the being put together by machines and stuff like that. Like, that's all here in this game, and then it's just turned up to 11 in Village. They've got the weak points, they've got the bits of, the weapons attached to them and stuff like this, and they're not the same, but it feels like when I was playing this game, I was like, oh, they took these designs and ramped them up a little bit for Village. So, because I really like them. I mean, everybody said, yeah, really good variety. There's a better variety of enemies in this game than there is in the Resident Evil game that released after it, that's for sure. But we've got, exploding enemies, spindly ones, industrial tool monsters, fire mini bosses, and the invisible flying enemies, which I hated. But yeah, there's there is so much, and it's so much. It never felt, I play Resident Evil 7 and I do get bored of the enemies. I do like the game a lot. I like Resident Evil 7 a lot. I get bored of the enemies. In this game, I didn't. It's like, oh, it's these guys again, or it's these guys, I've got to do this, that, and the other. And there was a nice mix. Everyone's mentioned the sort of dull ones as well, and that's fine. But a real mix of like Evil Within, Resident Evil Village, Silent Hill, body horror. It's all really cool. And I completely agree that Alex Wesker's mutation and, what she is one of the highlights. It's very, it's like, it is reminiscent of Lisa Trevor in a way as well, I think. And it's just that another thing that the people who made this game did to kind of extract from the previous Resident Evils that came before it and then do something new or reference or pay homage. And it's sort of, it feels, despite parts of this game and the enemies and some of the tone and stuff feeling like it isn't Resident Evil and it maybe is more Silent Hill, or you mentioned Saw as well, Psy and stuff like that. I think there's enough in here that makes it feel very at home in the world of Resident Evil, and something like Alex Wesker is part of that. And I like the fact that she's conscious and all this kind of stuff, which I think you mentioned, Steve. So yeah, just really, really nice variety of the BOWs. I think we're all generally in agreement there. But I was surprised no one mentioned Heisenberg. I thought that was going to come up straight away.
It's an interesting point. I won't be able to unsee it now. I'm going to sort of package the next two headings together because we are running a little bit longer than expected. So graphics and sound, we always do a section about those. Let's talk about presentation in general. Stuff has been mentioned as we've gone along, but how do we feel about the way the game looks and sounds? James, how do you feel about the aesthetics of Revelations 2?
I'm really sorry, but I need to talk about the optimization with this game in the graphics session, and that's all I'll talk about. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I will definitely judge this game quite harshly here in terms of it being on PC. This game came out the same year as The Witcher 3, just to give you guys some folks for some context, which was a very well optimized game at the time. Also, still considered one of the most beautiful games we've had to this date. And I know this was a budget game, but there are an incredible amount of cracks in it. Like, it's hidden with a lot of really clever saturation and cinematography, which I really love. And it really does deliver a cinematic experience. But I'm going to go into the PC port real quick. And something that I don't think Capcom should really be forgiven for, and that's the awful optimization. From the box, all low settings, I was getting 10 to 15 frames per second in certain areas. Cool. This is for a game that came out when the PC was actually my PC, which is a very old PC at this point. This PC was made for this game, supposedly. It was a mid to high range PC at the time. My CPU, for instance, is a mid to high, came out the year before this game came out. Actually, I think it was about 6 months before this game came out. So it should have been able to deal with it. But I found that the reason why it didn't deal with it is because Revelations 2 on PC only runs on a single CPU core.
Oh.
And before, I didn't realize why. I couldn't figure out why. I kept on investigating because I really needed to do this for the podcast, right? I went into this forum, this Russian forum, to find out the solution to the problem, which was to go into the config ini text file of this game and add some guy's code to open up the 3 other cores so I could even play this game effectively. Like, though I still had drops with the game, it's still badly optimized. The wild thing about this whole thing, like, that's all crazy, right? But the wild thing is that Capcom allowed this line of code to be written and be enabled within the game, but didn't add it themselves. You can't just add something and it not be there already, right? They removed it from the config ini, right? And then someone just added it back. So, not after 10 years, that's wild. You know, and I was getting all kinds of weird bugs, like prompts not popping up, the game just ending because prompts weren't popping up. I had to restart levels and things. And like, especially during this time, quad-core processors were commonplace. My CPU is a quad-core processor, and it was when they were really starting to get quite popular. I think they first started to come like 2012, 2013, but by 2015, they were mainstay. And it almost feels deliberate to PC gamers, to be honest, not to allow it, especially with all the stuff I went over. But that's my little rant over about the optimization. It reminded me a bit of Colonial Marines and its coding issues, and that's your only alien reference in this podcast.
You made one a minute ago. You called Alex a xenomorph.
Yeah, you did.
That's 2.
Oh, yeah, I did.
And you also,
cut that outside.
When you were talking about the Prometheus,
the
movie
that's
that
3.
Oh, shit, I've done 3.
You've done 3. So
I've done 2 without even realising it. It's in my mind.
You don't even know that you're doing it. I think, I'm glad that you're able to make that point about the optimization, because obviously I don't have a clue about it, but it's unfortunate because it smacks of laziness, if nothing else. Like, we've had this before. Like, people have asked us, when are we doing Operation Raccoon City? We've been putting it off because you buy it on Steam right now, you can't even boot the game because it's got the gateway. And I think it might maybe have changed, but it might still be the same, where it's the game's Windows Live thing, where it just doesn't open. It got redone for Xbox recently, but maybe on Steam I think it's still busted. But the fact that game is from 2012 and at least recently it was still buggered, and this is the same thing with 10 years, it's like, come on, like, it's just release a fix if it's a mistake or whatever, release a fix for it. Like, it's just absurd that they just let these things sit there like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a shame that you have to go in on that, because I did see that you and Kelsey were posting some screenshots of some of the incredible cinematography in the late game, some of the incredible like color grading and stuff that this game can do is really, really good. Which again, brings me nicely. Kelsey, how do you feel about the way this game looks and the way it sounds?
I won't go on too long. I think initially the first half of the game, there was a big part of me that thought it was lacking quite a bit of atmosphere. I think that comes right through in the second half of the game and towards the end. There's loads of atmosphere. There's moments, with the lighting in the mansion, with the dolls as well, and sort of caves area and stuff. There definitely is some atmosphere earlier, but it's just not as good as the later parts of the game, where I think earlier and throughout the game is really strong presentation wise. Like I mentioned before, is I think the cinematography of the cutscenes in general is really strong. And it's funny because this is, you mentioned, Si, right before sort of we're switching to the RE engine, the last, sort of bastion of these Resident Evils. And we have said many times how once we get to that RE engine stage, Capcom and Resident Evil and their cutscene direction is just incredible. And I think it, we've said it sings really well in RE2 and particularly Resident Evil 3 remake, where it's probably the best and I think hasn't been topped since then. I feel like whoever was involved in this game, really knew what they were doing with cinematic direction. And I mean in the form of camera moves and the character performances within the storytelling moments of those cutscenes. where they wanted it to be like a TV show. And I think they did really, really well. It looked as all right, it might not have looked CG wise as good as one of the CG movies, but it was as proficient, cinematography wise for what within the context of this game. I was so impressed watching it, and it's got a cutscene viewer in the options menu as well, so you can go back and watch them, and you'll see for yourself. It is really, really strong, and it makes some video games look really poor. Even games that came after it. But then on a whole, the graphics they are fine. This game is lower budget. I think they do really well with the tight budget. It's restricted to the smaller locations, and they push it for what they've got. And as the game went on, I was way more impressed with how it looked and the lighting and stuff like that. And by the end of it, and by those final cutscenes and the lines that are being delivered and everything, I was really, really enjoying how this game was being presented to me. Some of the music and sound is less amazing. I mean, there is some really cool like wobbly synths and stuff in this, which I do like, which again, I've said this before, it's quite on the nose, but they're in here and it makes it feel like the horror stuff that it wants to be, even if it is on the nose. And then a couple of other last little things. There is a really weird, and I just wanted to mention this. When you open the roller gates, there's this squeak sound that sounds like a dying smoke alarm battery. And I really thought my smoke alarm was running out of battery, and it wasn't until I was about 3 hours into the game I realised where the sound was coming from. So yeah, I don't know if they did that just to troll people and stuck a smoke alarm sound in there. But anyway, the server room chaos and explosions, that was visually exciting. And then I suppose slightly connected to the dialogue and presentation is I do think the performances generally from the main characters are all really strong, and I think the voice actors felt like they were... Yeah. Again, the Eye of Sauron isn't on them in this game. I feel like everybody was having fun in the voice booth, and yeah, this game has got some incredible lines of dialogue that are delivered earnestly with a bit of tongue-in-cheek as well. And yeah, presentation-wise, big thumbs up for this game. For what it is. It isn't the big mainline Resident Evil. Mm-hmm. It's a souped-up... I was going to say mobile game again. That really sort of... That's maybe... too harsh. It's not a mobile game. It's not a big mainline Resident Evil, but for what it is, it's really, really good.
Yes, indeed. I think the cutscenes in this game have always been particularly strong. This could be a me thing. So for clarity, I played it on an Xbox Series S. I played the version off the store, so that would have been the Xbox 360 version, I guess, upscaled. The Xbox One version,
probably, yeah.
Upscaled? Yeah, Xbox One, wasn't it? I might have been my setup. And the reason I did that is I owned it physically, but now I have a Series S, so I don't have a disc drive, so I had to buy it again. This might be my setup. I thought that the early part of the game seems to generate mood by being dark. Mm-hmm. More than anything else. Like, a lot of it is like, hey, there's some darkness here. And I thought maybe the recommended brightness seemed a bit too dark. Again, that is just down to maybe my TV or whatever else. So I turned the brightness up, and I didn't have too much of an issue there. But I did have some like crazy artifacting going on in cutscenes when the brightness was up, which might be because of the brightness being up, or maybe not, I'm not sure. But there was some stuff going on in some cutscenes that was very, very odd. But other than that, yeah, I generally agree. It looks really good in game. I didn't really have any issues, like any visual hiccups or anything like that. The color grading's good. Even in some of the quote-unquote lesser episodes or parts, you can find something that looks particularly nice. The skyboxes in episode 2, when you're moving around the abandoned city sort of area, city, town, whatever, were really nice. These cobalty sort of blue, moody skies. There's plenty of nice looking stuff in here. Lighting effects, the sort of red glow, the warning red glow that's all around various locations. Pretty good. Soundtrack has its own identity as well, which is nice. We've talked about this on Now That's What I Call Survival Horror over on YouTube, but that sort of bassy sort of siren synth, and it has a bit of a leitmotif on a violin that crops up every now and then that I really enjoy. which is cool. It's a shame that the voiceovers in the gameplay are a little bit limited. Like Natalia just constantly screaming, "The monster's coming! The monster's coming!" Got a bit tiring almost instantly. But other than that, and the guns feeling a bit weedy, it wasn't like demonstrably effective of my enjoyment of the experience. Steve, how do you feel about the presentation of Revelations 2?
To say that the texture work you can tell is a bit lower budget and lower res kind of feels like it could have been a generation before. I can get along with a lot of the aesthetics of this game. It's I guess that's testament down to level design, lighting, and all that. There's more to making something look nice than just having good textures. Everybody, tell that to the people who make 100 gigabyte games and all the rest of it. It's pretty good. I would rather say smaller character models doing the heavy lifting. They obviously cheat and do all the cutscenes in pre-rendered FMV, or at least the significant ones.
Yeah.
I have no real complaints other than I really hate barbed wire men. No. I'm going to disagree with everyone on the sounds. I think the guns sound kind of fun and punchy, to be honest. But that might be because I'm, obviously still recovering from addiction to raid mode, where you use them a hell of a lot. Musically, I appreciate that it's surprisingly got a lot of identity for both campaigns. Like there's more of a twisted, demented synth uses the core for Claire's and a mournful, sorrowful violin for Barry. The main theme from Revelations Returns is a nice reprise in its own twisted kind of semi-grindhouse fashion. I don't know how else you'd call it, really. You're blasting the old theme through a weird synthesizer, I guess. Yeah, it's fun. I'll keep it brief, and it's not going to be the best or knock your socks off visually or acoustically, but it's still probably one of the stronger in the franchise.
Cool. Okay, so one last thing before we tie this up, and again, I appreciate that I've kind of squeezed this into a little area when Steve, for example, could talk about raid mode forever and a day, do a whole podcast series on it. But let's talk about the additional modes in Revelations 2, which is raid mode coming back from Revelations 1, and there's also 2 extra episodes that were included in the physical release of the game, which is The Struggle, which is Moira between the collapse of the tower to literally stops at her turning up during the final boss during Barry's episode 4, and then Little Miss, which takes place again in that 6 months period, but sees how Natalia, when she got separated from Claire and Moira via Alex Wesker kidnap, getting to the beach where she meets Barry immediately. So, Steve, I'm going to bounce it to you first again, just because obviously, like I said, and as you said, recovering from a raid mode addiction. Talk about raid mode, talk about the additional stuff. How do you feel about what else Revelations 2 has to offer?
Okay, Little Miss is probably the weakest addition. It's a awkward puzzle game with the emphasis on stealth, where you play as Natalia and Dark Natalia, who obviously has Wesker's colour scheme. Classic Wesker's colour scheme. It's all right. I won't be playing it ever again, except if the podcast requires me to play it again as some kind of contractual obligation. It's okay. It's basically a metaphor for Alex's quote-unquote trying to rewrite Natalia's brain. Mm-hmm. And then she appears on the beach and looks all puzzled about it. Okay. Moira's one, if it was a bit better tutorialized, I think has a lot of weight, because mechanically, that version of Moira is sort of overpowered, because she's got the traditional crowbar melee attack, but then she's got the stealth takedowns and stuff, which is actually more powerful than the other characters. And it's a progression of the island's downfall as she survives it. With Evgeny, who's a character who is in the thing, we never talked about him. He's a grumpy Russian or Hungarian man. Doesn't really have much to say other than being a miserable old git. So raid mode then. Raid mode is vastly expanded from the gauntlets of Revelations 1, with the caveat that a lot of it is shorter. You're looking at smaller battle gauntlets with a wider set of characters, not just from Resident Evil Revelations 2, but you even get, I think, Jill from Revelations 1, and then the Resident Evil 6 principal cast. Mm-hmm. And Hunk's obviously there because, of course, he is. And Wesker's there because he's a fan favourite who we can't let go of for whatever reason. But more importantly, it has settings and environments not just from Revelations this time. You have Revelations 2, you have a handful of DLC maps based on Revelations 1, then you've got RE5, and you've got RE6. And it includes enemies from all of them. This being basically a set gauntlet of shooting galleries with a big character progression systems with unique skills and level ups and all sorts of cool loot to find. You can grind through it and have a lot of fun. I'm trying not to go too deep into the weeds because, like I said, I could be here for hours. But basically, there's unique character skills for every character, lots of weapons, and enemies from across the series, maps across from across the series. This could be its own standalone game. There is that much content in it.
It's the closest, we talked about this before, it's like the closest to a celebration of Resident Evil as we've actually got. Maybe with the exception of like Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D. But as you said, like pulling from so many different games. Even just when you boot up for the first time, like the first run of missions you go on are like, oh wait, this is from RE6. Like all the first set of maps. That's really cool. And I appreciate raid mode. I've said before that I've struggled or haven't really played a lot of the side games in Resident Evil games, but the one exception to that was Revelations 2's raid mode, and just dipping my toe back into it a little bit this past sort of week or so before the pod and going, oh yeah, this was great, wasn't it? We should play a bit more of that. So maybe we'll do some of that on server or something in the future, who knows, but I would like to experience more raid mode and maybe even talk about raid mode a bit more in depth down the line. In terms of the other one, I'm the same as you, Little Miss. I just wanted it to be over, to be honest. It just dragged. And it wasn't very interesting. And it just felt like it was an obligation of like, we need to include some extras for the physical. And you've absolutely hit the nail on the head with the other one as well, with the struggle. They so badly tutorialized that. Like, it made sense to me by the end of things, I think. And I love that it did the awesome thing of filling in that gap and letting Moira use guns. But I didn't understand the grab the supplies so that you can reset, but when you die it doesn't use the supplies, only if you choose to reset. Like, I don't know, I was so lost by the end of it, but I beat it, so I'm happy. And also, yes, you're right, we didn't mention Evgeny, who shows up briefly in the campaign, but you get him here and you get the sort of 6-month relationship who between her and him and Moira as a bit of a brief father and daughter thing. He's missing his daughter and looking for his daughter, and she's got her troubles with her dad. So all praise Evgeny. We now have the trifecta of Barrys, basically. American Barry, Italian Barry and Parker, and now we have Russian Barry as well. So thank you for that, Capcom. Kels, how do you feel about raid mode and the extra chapters?
I do fully think we should at some point do a separate raid mode episode of some kind, because there's so much to say, and I have to be honest, I've only played it for like half an hour, and I know there's so much to it.
Okay, cool.
So I played a few rounds, really enjoyed it, saw all the depth to it, and like Steve mentioned, it could probably be its own game. And then what happened is at the top of the screen, a message rolled across that said Cyniac has 27 more gold medals than you. So I turned it off and never want to play it again. Yeah, let's all play it some more, and maybe
You think that's bad, Kells? I got 2,000 to chase with Steve.
And then I do think, yeah, maybe we could do an more or something, I think, dedicated to raid mode, because there's lots there, and I need to dive back into it. The DLC episodes, completely in agreement. Steve will vouch for me. I messaged him with some expletives asking what the hell I was supposed to be doing on the struggle, because I was struggling. I mean, I got it, those first two sort of areas where you had to get supplies in the little horde mode. The beach area with supplies, where the game basically punishes you and sends you back to the very beginning.
Oh my God.
It tore it with me, and I was just like, no thanks, I'm not finishing this. So yeah, so I didn't actually finish that. Little Miss, like you've said, I mean, I breezed through it, to be honest. It was just kind of creeping past the enemies, and I didn't really struggle too much, but I didn't really get much out of it. It was pretty straightforward, and I just thought the bear, the Lottie bear character was quite fun and funny. But, it was nice, and it felt like as a DLC package, there's something there, and for the size of this game, it's cool that they tried something different, I suppose, and didn't just make you replay, I don't know, something you'd already done. And I know it's in the same areas, but it's just they were trying to experiment with some little things. And, the collecting supplies, I'm playing MGS3 all of a sudden, like killing rabbits and eating them. And so it was a bit weird. But yeah, it's fine. But I do think, sincerely, we should do a follow-up on raid mode at some point.
It's probably a good idea. James, you mentioned about 2,000 medals or whatever to catch up on Steve, but that is the same no matter what platform you're on, I think. Like, he's just like smashed it on every platform that's available.
Yeah, he's just everywhere.
Because that's
Hey.
I can't get away
That's
from
medal
Steve.
shaming.
I'm not medal shaming, I'm just stating a fact. James, how did you feel about the extra stuff? How much experience did you have with that?
I did struggle quite a bit on the surface, but it clearly didn't have much time put into it. Felt very half-baked. It did give the Moira character some needed context as well. And even though Evgeny, like you said, was basically Russian Barry, I did warm to him towards the end. Unfortunately, Little Miss is based on something I really cannot get on with in video games ever, which is complete stealth. It felt tedious after my 2 attempts, and I stopped playing, and I just watched a YouTube video of someone much better at it than I am. It was cool.
Is a good word.
Yeah, it was cool because there were times when I just, there was no clear notifier of where these revenants were looking, and that was the actual point of the game mode. So sometimes I just get BC and I didn't know why, and then I watched this guy play, and he's just walking in front of them and they can't see him. Not even crouching; he's just walking in front of them. It's wild. It added some nice extra context for Natalia. Seeing that Alex's alter ego within Natalia was giving her these powers to detect things was cool.
Yeah.
Base Natalia doesn't have those powers. It's just Alex 2.0. Whether it added any extra context for Natalia down the line is another matter, though. She still felt a bit alien to me. Natalia did that as a character. Raid mode, though, biggest surprise for me of this entire game. Well fleshed out multiplayer gauntlet with fully customizable weapons and little loot boxes as well. I freaking love loot boxes. Give me those. Give me that crap. Especially when I don't have to pay for it. The fact I couldn't get enough hours in before the podcast with Raid over the last 3 weeks is a great testament to its content that it has. And that's me. I have a lot of time on my hands. But yeah, it goes way beyond Revelation. This Raid goes way beyond Revelations 2 with its weapons, its monster roster, tactics. I'm going to be playing after this podcast as well for a bit, just to get the fix again, because it does get addictive. Though I like it because it's very short. It's a very short addiction. Like, you can play a couple of rounds and be okay for the day, But yeah, it makes me all the more confused why Capcom has failed in recent years to do a substantial extra game mode or multiplayer visits. Like, they just seem to be inept of doing that. I don't know why.
I'm going to get out the soapbox real quick, James, but if they just put this and Mercenaries in a duo package with stuff across the series, that's all the people want. And Outbreak.
Yep.
Get on it.
All right, let's wrap this up. How are we all feeling about Revelations 2 now that we've discussed it in detail? How do you feel it ranks as a weird little side game, as a weird game in between 6 and 7? Kelsey, let's start with you. Final thoughts on Resident Evil Revelations 2.
This is definitely a game that I just feel so bad for not giving the time of day when it came out. I was a little bit out of touch with the series, as I mentioned at the time, but I think if I'd have given it the time properly back then, I'd have really seen what it was trying to do, because this is, despite being stripped back and a side game and not having as big a budget, it's very clearly made by people who, they get Resident Evil, and although they're juggling the sort of the slightly more action of the more modern games, that there's so much in here that harkens back to the original games in the same way that Resident Evil Revelations 1 did as well, but this does it even more. And I think there's a lot in here for fans like me to enjoy, and that I would have enjoyed. So I feel really stupid for not playing it when it came out, because playing it this time, for the most part, the entire playthrough, I had a smile on my face. I wasn't being... I know I mentioned I was frustrated with the DLC, but the main game itself, it's just, I had an absolute blast playing it. It's does so well with the constraints that it's got to, particularly I think for me at the moment, where a lot of what I play, I generally am looking for sort of accessible, easily digestible games. This is like, yeah, what more could I ask for? So I was really, really pleased with how it played, really pleased with what it does for Barry. As I've mentioned, it's just, yeah, it's Jill Valentine's still my favourite character, but it's like Barry, this is another reason, this is why he's up there. And I know James hates him, and that's fine, but I still love him. Yeah, and I think as a package, the replayable nature of the campaign with the scores and the skills, it's the sort of arcadey nature to it as well. Plus raid mode and the DLC, this really is like a must-own for Resident Evil fans, I think. And I'm very glad to have played it for this podcast. And I still feel like there's bits of it I haven't touched. I've mentioned raid mode, but also, like, I was going back and looking at my achievements. There's a few more I haven't got. And then I haven't really dabbled with looking at the skills and how I can maybe, I don't know, min-max some of it a little bit and have some fun on harder difficulties and play through it again, because I haven't deleted it from my Xbox. It's still there, and I can see myself jumping back in sometime soon. So yeah, it's a fantastic game for what it is, and I highly recommend it if you're a Resident Evil fan and you haven't played it yet.
Nice. James, what are your concluding thoughts on Rev 2?
Despite my issues with Barry and the optimization of this game, I did really enjoy my time with it. It does need some shine, though. If Capcom ever want to touch it again, they won't. I am daring you, Capcom. I still stand by my opinion of this being the soft launch of modern Resident Evils as we know them now.
Yeah.
They experimented with a lot of stuff here, and a lot of it really stuck the landing as well. It should be played by every Resi fan and beyond. It is a ton of fun.
Nice. Steve, final thoughts on Rev 2?
Starting with just the raid mode, it's the yeah. You already heard that soapbox bit. Okay, so moving on to Revelations 2 proper. Mechanically, it's a greatest hits album with stealth. It's got the zapping system and nods to Resident Evil 2 in terms of what you do with one character can affect the other. It's even got stuff from Resident Evil 0. You have character swapping, and you can drop items and then pick them back up. But that being said, yeah, as a interquel between Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6, it does a lot more than it really has the rights to narratively. Some of the characters don't really land, but Ouroboros does appear, and it's Barry's best game to date with him as the lead character. It's also the only one. Yeah, so basically this is a Resident Evil game literally for the super fans, I feel. It's got a lot to love. If you're not a Resident Evil fan, though, if this was your entry point to the series, geez, you'd be lost. And to that, yeah, Capcom, more raid, please.
That's it.
Tap the credit card.
Yeah, this is it's funny actually. Yeah, this is a Resident Evil game by fans for fans, isn't it?
Yeah.
If we're led to be believed, it feels like it's been made with love, and yeah, like if you're a Resident Evil fan, there's so much in here, mechanically, reference-wise, as an important linchpin in the story, in a similar way that Code Veronica is, where like a bunch of things kind of connect into it. The other sort of direction, Code Veronica, loads of things kind of spring forth from T Veronica and so on and so forth. Revelations 2 sort of looks to everything else and goes, here's where we can just bridge inwards a little bit. And Steve, you used the words more than it has the right to. That's how I feel about it in general. It's better than it has any right of being. James, you're absolutely right. It's the connecting thing between 6 and 7. Like it's a very steep incline, but it isn't a sudden jump. This is where they went, oh, people like this one, do they? Okay, cool. We'll do horror again. Fine. And this was the little like scrap that I sort of survived on in that period before 7 landed, certainly. We meme about it all the time that Code Veronica is the quote-unquote most underrated because it's underrated by everyone and therefore it can't be underrated. But if you were going to call a Resident Evil game legitimately underrated, it probably is Rev 2, because I think outside of super fans, not that many people seem to have played it, but it is apparently in the top 30 Capcom bestsellers, so maybe not. I don't know. Nobody seems to talk about it as much as it deserves, I think is the point that I'm trying to make. And I'm glad that we finally got the opportunity to ramble for basically 3 hours about it. But nothing else remains for me to thank the panel, our contributors, and our community. Join us on the First Aid Spray Discord server to hear the show early and check out our merch store or our Patreon to support the show. Don't forget that these and our social media links can be found at faspraypod.com. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all good podcasting apps. And if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review where you can and spread the good word. In the next episode, we forego viral agents in favour of something more ancient and strange as we return to our lore-focused series to cover Resident Evil's deadliest parasite in virology, Las Plagas. Finally, thank you to the panel. Follow the Pueblo people on social media. I'm at SciWhite on Blue Sky. Steve is at FP Steve on Blue Sky. Moist Owlet is Moist Owlet OFF on Blue Sky. I don't know why I'm saying on Blue Sky every time. But Kelsey is KDB_init on Blue Sky. And thank you for listening. Have a good week.
Go.
We got all the funny out before we recorded. We've got no bloopers.
We'll say something funny. Steve, say something funny.
This is the part where I can pretend my mic's
yeah. Right, let's talk about a much better game. Hello, survivors, and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 97 of the show, and in this...
There's a blooper. We got it.
That's a good intro. They'll get it.